What would you do if a stranger claimed you as his wife in front of 100 people to save you both from ruin? Elena Cross thought she was walking into a simple seamstress job. Instead, she stepped into the middle of a wealthy engagement party where whispers cut like knives and a drunk patron cornered her in the shadows. Just when humiliation threatened to swallow her whole, Caleb Hartwell, the most feared rancher in Wyoming, pulled her into the light and spoke 5 words that changed everything. "Gentlemen, meet my wife." The lie shocked the ballroom into silence, but it also bound two strangers together in a dangerous game where the rules were clear. No feelings, no truth, no love. Only, some rules are made to be broken. If you want to know how a lie became the most honest thing they ever shared, stay with me until the end. And if you're watching from somewhere in this wide world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The November wind carried the scent of snow and wood smoke across the Wyoming plains, biting through Elena Cross's worn wool coat as the stagecoach rattled toward Hartwell Ranch. She pressed her cold fingers against the leather satchel in her lap, the one that held everything she owned: 3 needles, a spool of black thread, her mother's thimble, and a letter from Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell requesting her services as a seamstress for the upcoming winter season. It was supposed to be simple work: mending, alterations, maybe a few new dresses for the lady of the house, enough to send money home to her younger sister in Denver, enough to keep the bank from taking their mother's cottage, enough to prove that Elena Cross was more than the daughter of a man who drank himself to death and left nothing but debts behind. The driver pulled the horses to a stop at the top of a long gravel drive. Through the dusty window, Elena saw it, the Hartwell estate sprawling across the valley like something out of a storybook. The main house stood 3 stories tall, built from golden stone that caught the late afternoon sun. Wraparound porches gleamed with fresh white paint. Barns and stables stretched out behind it, and in the distance cattle dotted the hills like scattered seeds. Wealth, power, the kind of life Elena had only glimpsed through shop windows. "This is your stop, miss," the driver called down, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Elena climbed down carefully, her worn boots sinking into the gravel. She straightened her coat, tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, and lifted her chin. She'd learned early that confidence could hide a multitude of shortcomings, even if your dress had been mended 6 times and your last meal was yesterday's bread. She approached the front entrance, raising her hand to knock, when the door swung open before her knuckles touched wood. A butler stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the entrance hall blazed with light, chandeliers dripping with crystal, polished floors reflecting golden warmth, and the distinct sound of music and laughter echoing from somewhere deep inside the house. "Deliveries go to the back entrance," the butler said curtly, already moving to close the door. "I'm not making a delivery," Elena said quickly. "I'm Elena Cross. Mrs. Hartwell sent for me. I'm the seamstress." The butler's gaze swept over her threadbare coat and scuffed boots, lingering just long enough to make her skin prickle with shame. "Mrs. Hartwell is indisposed. The household is hosting an important event this evening. Return tomorrow." "But I traveled 2 days to get here." The letter said, "Tomorrow." The door shut with quiet finality. Elena stood alone on the porch, her breath coming short and fast. The money for her return ticket was already spent on food she couldn't afford not to eat. She had $4 left to her name. Not enough for a hotel. Not enough for anything. She closed her eyes, steadying herself against the wave of panic. Then she heard it, a woman's voice, bright and commanding, cutting through the evening air. "Nonsense, Thomas. If Mrs. Hartwell sent for her, then she's expected. Let the poor girl in before she freezes." The door opened again. A woman in her 60s stood there, dressed in deep purple silk, her silver hair swept into an elegant twist. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind, assessing Elena with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. "You must be Miss Cross," the woman said. "I'm Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell. Forgive Thomas. He gets overzealous when we have guests. Come in, child, before the cold gets into your bones." Elena stepped into warmth that felt like stepping into a dream. The entrance hall was even more magnificent up close. Carved wood paneling, oil paintings in gilded frames, a grand staircase that curved upward like a ribbon. And people, everywhere. Men in tailored suits and women in gowns that cost more than Elena would earn in a year moved through the hall, champagne glasses in hand, jewels glittering at throats and wrists. The air hummed with wealth and ease, with the kind of comfort that came from never having to worry about where the next meal would come from. Elena felt every eye turned toward her, felt the weight of their assessment, the shabby coat, the patched dress beneath it, the dust on her boots. "I apologize for the chaos," Mrs. Hartwell said, guiding Elena toward a quieter corner. "My son's engagement celebration began an hour ago. I didn't realize you'd be arriving today, or I would have made proper arrangements." "Engagement?" Elena's stomach sank. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. The letter said November 15th, and today is November 15th, Mrs. Hartwell said with a wry smile. "I'm the one who should apologize. I've been managing 2 households, planning this disaster of a party, and apparently losing track of my own correspondence." She squeezed Elena's arm gently. "But you're here now, and I won't send you back out into the cold. Come. There's a room prepared for you upstairs. You can rest, have some supper sent up, and we'll discuss your work in the morning." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you, truly." Mrs. Hartwell led her toward the grand staircase, but they'd only climbed 3 steps when a man's voice boomed across the hall. "Adelaide, there you are! We've been looking everywhere." A portly man in an expensive suit strode toward them, his face flushed with champagne and self-importance. Behind him came a woman dripping in diamonds and a younger couple who looked vaguely bored. "Senator Morrison," Mrs. Hartwell said with practiced politeness. "We need Caleb," the senator interrupted. "He's disappeared again, and the Fairfaxes want to make the formal announcement. Can't have an engagement party without the groom, can we?" Mrs. Hartwell's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sure he's just stepped out for air. You know how my son feels about crowds." "Well, he'd better feel differently soon," Morrison said with a laugh that held no humor. "This union is important for both families, for the territory's future." His gaze slid to Elena, dismissing her in an instant. "Who's this?" "A guest," Mrs. Hartwell said firmly. "Doesn't look like any guest I've ever seen." Morrison's eyes traveled over Elena's worn clothing with open disdain. "Although I suppose Caleb always did have eclectic taste." The insult landed like a slap. Elena felt heat flood her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral, kept her chin level. She'd endured worse than a drunk man's contempt. "If you'll excuse us," Mrs. Hartwell said coldly, "I was showing Miss Cross to her room." But Morrison had already lost interest, turning back toward the party with his entourage in tow. "Find your son, Adelaide, before Victor Fairfax loses his patience." Mrs. Hartwell waited until they were out of earshot before releasing a long breath. "That man is insufferable," she murmured. Then louder, "Come, my dear, let's get you settled before anyone else decides to be rude." They climbed to the 2nd floor, where the sounds of the party faded to a distant murmur. The hallway stretched long and quiet, lit by wall sconces that cast warm pools of light across thick carpet. Mrs. Hartwell stopped at a door near the end. "This will be your room," she said, opening it to reveal a space that made Elena's throat tighten. A 4-poster bed with a quilted coverlet, a washstand with an actual mirror, a window overlooking the valley, where the last light of day painted the hills in shades of amber and rose. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered. "I'll have supper brought up. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss your work properly." Mrs. Hartwell paused at the door, her expression softening. "And Miss Cross? Don't let men like Morrison make you feel small. You're worth 10 of him, fancy coat or not." The door closed softly, leaving Elena alone in more luxury than she'd ever known. She set down her satchel, ran her fingers over the smooth coverlet, and allowed herself one moment of weakness. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears come. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of the bone-deep terror that had been her companion for months finally loosening its grip. She was safe. For tonight, at least, she was safe. The knock came an hour later, after Elena had washed her face and changed into her only other dress, dark blue cotton, carefully mended but clean. She opened the door expecting a maid with supper. Instead, she found a young woman in a sage-green gown, her blonde hair artfully curled, her expression sharp with curiosity. So you're the seamstress, the woman said, looking Elena up and down. I'm Beatrice Morrison, the senator's daughter. She didn't wait for an invitation, sweeping into the room with the ease of someone who'd never been denied entrance anywhere. Mother sent me to tell you that supper will be delayed. The kitchen is overwhelmed with the party. Her smile was all teeth. Of course, you could come down and join the celebration. There's plenty of food. It was a test. Elena recognized it immediately, the same kind of test she'd faced 100 times growing up on the poor side of Denver when girls from good families wanted to see if she'd embarrass herself. That's kind, Elena said carefully, but I wouldn't want to intrude on a private celebration. Oh, it's not that private, Beatrice said airily. Half the territory is here. One more person wouldn't matter. She moved to the window, trailing her fingers along the sill. Although I suppose you might feel out of place, these sorts of gatherings can be intimidating if you're not used to them. There it was, the subtle cruelty wrapped in false concern. I appreciate the invitation, Elena said, keeping her voice level, but I'm quite tired from traveling. Beatrice turned, her expression calculating. Suit yourself, but you should know, there's talk downstairs. About Mrs. Hartwell bringing in a strange woman during her son's engagement party. Some people are saying it's disrespectful to the Fairfax family. She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Just thought you'd want to know what people are thinking. She left before Elena could respond, her footsteps fading down the hall. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She should have known. Should have realized that showing up tonight looking the way she did would cause talk. Rich people always found something to whisper about, someone to look down on. She moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, guests spilled out onto the back terrace, their laughter carrying on the night air. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting dancing shadows across manicured gardens. A quartet played somewhere, the music mingling with conversation and the clink of crystal. It was beautiful. It was also a world she would never belong to. She was about to turn away when she saw him, a man standing alone at the edge of the terrace, half hidden in shadow. Tall, broad-shouldered, his posture rigid with tension. Even from this distance, Elena could see he didn't belong to the party's easy gaiety. He stood like a man enduring rather than celebrating, his dark suit somehow making him look more isolated rather than included. As she watched, a woman in an elaborate pink gown approached him, reaching for his arm. He stepped back, shaking his head. The woman persisted, her gestures becoming more animated. Finally, he turned and walked away from the party entirely, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lantern light. Elena wondered if that was Caleb Hartwell, the groom who kept disappearing from his own engagement party. Despite her exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. Elena lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the party continue below, and tried not to think about tomorrow, about the work she was hired to do, about whether Mrs. Hartwell would regret bringing her here once she saw how people reacted to Elena's presence. Near midnight, her stomach growling loud enough to echo in the quiet room, Elena gave up on sleep. She lit the bedside lamp and decided to venture downstairs. Not to the party, never that, but perhaps to the kitchen, where she might find some bread or cheese without bothering anyone. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and slipped into the hallway. The house had quieted somewhat, though she could still hear music and conversation drifting up from below. She found a servant's staircase and descended carefully, following the scent of roasted meat and fresh bread. The kitchen was warm and bright, empty except for a young woman washing dishes at a large stone sink. She looked up as Elena entered, her expression wary. "I'm sorry to intrude," Elena said quickly. "I'm staying upstairs and I missed supper. I thought I might find something small. I don't want to be any trouble." The girl's expression softened. "You're the seamstress, aren't you, Miss Cross?" At Elena's nod, she smiled. "I'm Mary. Mrs. Hartwell told us to take care of you." She dried her hands on her apron. "Sit down. I'll fix you a proper plate." Elena started to protest, but Mary was already moving, pulling out cold chicken, fresh bread, butter, a wedge of cheese. She set it all on the wooden work table with a glass of milk. "Thank you," Elena said, meaning it deeply. "You didn't have to—" "Eat," Mary said firmly. "You look half-starved." She returned to her dishes, then added over her shoulder, "Don't mind the fancy folks upstairs. They're always like this when there's a big event. full of themselves and their opinions. Elena took a bite of bread, and it was so good she nearly moaned. Real butter, fresh baked. When had she last eaten anything that wasn't 3 days old? I met Miss Morrison, Elena said between bites. She seemed concerned about my presence. Mary snorted. Beatrice Morrison is concerned about anything that might threaten her position. She's had her eye on Mr. Caleb for years, but he never gave her the time of day. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Truth is, nobody expected this engagement to Miss Fairfax either. It came out of nowhere about 6 weeks ago. Rumor is it's all political. Her father and Senator Morrison have business interests together, and they want the Hartwell land and influence tied to their plans. Elena shouldn't ask. It wasn't her business, but curiosity won. And Mr. Hartwell, what does he want? Mary's expression turned somber. That's the question, isn't it? He's a good man, Miss Cross. Fair to his workers, honest in his dealings. But he's also private. Keeps his feelings locked up tight. She shook her head. All I know is he hasn't smiled once since the engagement was announced. And tonight, at his own party, he looks like a man walking to his own hanging. The image of the solitary figure at the edge of the terrace flashed through Elena's mind. The rigid shoulders, the way he'd stepped away from the woman in pink like her touch burned. That's sad, Elena said quietly. That's life for people like us, Mary replied. We don't get to choose. We do what we must to survive. She gestured at Elena's nearly empty plate. More? No, thank you. This was perfect. Elena stood, carrying her dishes to the sink. Let me help you finish. Absolutely not, Mary said, shooing her away. You're a guest. Go on back to bed. Tomorrow will come early enough. Elena thanked her again and slipped back toward the servants' staircase. But as she climbed, she heard voices echoing from somewhere nearby, raised, angry voices that made her pause. Absolutely insist, Caleb. You've been hiding all evening. I haven't been hiding, Mother. I've been trying to breathe. Elena froze. She shouldn't listen, should climb the stairs and mind her own business. But something in the man's voice, the raw exhaustion beneath the words, kept her rooted in place. This is important, Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice strained. The Fairfaxes expect certain courtesies. Margaret has been looking for you. Margaret doesn't want to find me any more than I want to be found. Footsteps paced across hardwood. This entire arrangement is a farce, and you know it. What I know is that you agreed to this engagement. I agreed to protect the ranch from Morrison's political maneuvering. That doesn't mean I have to pretend to be happy about it. A long silence. When Mrs. Hartwell spoke again, her voice was gentler. Caleb, son, I know this isn't what you wanted, but sometimes we have to do what's necessary. His laugh held no humor. I'm aware. I've been doing what's necessary my entire life. Tonight is just another performance. If you just give Margaret a chance, I've given her every chance. She's a perfectly pleasant woman who deserves someone who can actually love her. That person isn't me. His voice dropped lower, rough with something that might have been grief. I won't do that to another woman, Mother. I won't pretend I can give what I don't have anymore. Elena's chest tightened. She didn't know this man's story, didn't know what had carved that hollowness into his voice, but she recognized the sound of it. The same sound she'd heard in her own voice after her father died, after the debts came due, after she realized that wanting something different didn't make it possible. Then what will you do? Mrs. Hartwell asked softly. What I always do. Survive the night. Face tomorrow. Keep moving forward. Elena turned and climbed the stairs silently, her heart aching for a man she'd never met. She understood that philosophy too well, the art of enduring, of putting one foot in front of the other, even when you couldn't see the path ahead. She should have gone straight to her room, should have locked the door, climbed into bed, and stayed far away from the drama unfolding in the Hartwell house. But Elena had always been too curious for her own good. Instead of climbing to the second floor, she found herself drawn toward the sounds of the party. Not to join it, never that, but to see, to understand the world she'd stumbled into. She found a small alcove off the main hall, partially hidden behind a potted fern where she could observe without being observed. The ballroom stretched before her, all golden light and swirling gowns, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic rainbows across polished floors. At the center of it all stood a young woman in an elaborate white gown, Miss Fairfax, presumably, pretty in a delicate china doll way with pale blonde hair and a practiced smile. She held court among a group of guests, laughing at something Senator Morrison said, her hand resting possessively on the arm of— Elena's breath caught. The man from the terrace, Caleb Hartwell. Up close, even from across the room, he was striking. Not handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too hard for that, his jaw too angular, his dark eyes too shadowed, but compelling. He stood a head taller than most men in the room, his black suit fitting perfectly across broad shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed but looked like it wanted to be wild. And his expression, miserable. He looked absolutely miserable. Margaret Fairfax said something, leaning close, and he nodded politely. But his eyes were distant, his posture rigid. When she reached up to adjust his collar, an intimate gesture that suggested ownership, Elena saw his jaw clench, saw him resist the instinct to pull away. Poor bastard looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Elena jumped, turning to find a man lounging against the wall beside her alcove. He was younger than Caleb, maybe 25, with an easy smile and eyes that held sharp intelligence beneath the casual demeanor. "I didn't mean to spy," Elena said quickly. "Neither did I," the man said cheerfully. "But here we both are, hiding in the shadows while Rome burns." He extended his hand. "James Hartwell, the disappointing younger brother." Elena Cross. She shook his hand, noting the calluses that suggested he wasn't just a wealthy man's son playing at work. "Ah," James said, "the mysterious seamstress who's caused such a stir. Beatrice Morrison has been speculating about you for the past hour. According to her, you're either a long-lost relative, a former lover, or a spy from a rival ranching family." Despite herself, Elena smiled. "I'm none of those things, just someone who needs work." "Then you've definitely come to the wrong party," James said, his gaze drifting back to the ballroom. "This whole thing is a disaster waiting to happen. My brother looks ready to bolt. Margaret looks like she's performing for an audience, and Senator Morrison is 3 drinks away from starting a brawl with anyone who questions his plans for the territory." "Why did he agree to it?" Elena asked. "Mr. Caleb, I mean, if he's this unhappy." James's expression sobered. "Because my brother has spent his entire life doing what he thinks is right, instead of what he wants. Our father built this ranch from nothing, and when he died, Caleb took on everything, the land, the debts, the responsibility for every person who works here. Morrison has been pushing for years to get control of our water rights and grazing land for his railroad plans. An alliance with the Fairfax family gives Caleb political protection." He shook his head. "But the cost is his freedom, his life, any chance at actual happiness." Elena felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the understanding that came from living the same truth. Sometimes survival doesn't leave room for happiness. "No," James agreed quietly. "But that doesn't mean we stop wanting it." They stood in companionable silence, watching the performance unfold. Then, across the ballroom, Elena saw a man weaving through the crowd, older, red-faced, already drunk. He was heading straight for Caleb and Margaret, and the expression on his face promised trouble. "Who's that?" she asked. James cursed under his breath. "Victor Fairfax. Margaret's father, and he looks absolutely sloshed." He straightened. "This won't end well." It didn't. Victor Fairfax reached the group and grabbed Caleb's arm with more force than friendliness. "There's the groom," he announced loudly, "hiding your new bride from us all evening. Come, Caleb, let's make the announcement proper. Show everyone what this alliance means." Caleb's expression went carefully blank. "Sir, perhaps we should wait until—" "Wait?" Victor laughed, his voice carrying across the room. "We've been waiting all night. My daughter deserves to be celebrated." He pulled Margaret forward, then grabbed Caleb's hand and pressed it over Margaret's. "There, a pledge before witnesses. Hartwell land and Fairfax influence united at last." The crowd began to applaud, but it was scattered, uncertain. Margaret's smile looked strained. And Caleb looked like a man caught in a trap. Senator Morrison stepped forward, champagne glass raised. "To the happy couple. May this union bring prosperity to... He never finished the sentence, because that's when the drunk patron, some business associate of Morrison's that Elena didn't recognize, grabbed her arm and yanked her out of the alcove and into the ballroom. "There she is," he slurred, his grip bruising. "The little seamstress. Been watching you, pretty thing. Thought you could hide, but I found you." Every eye in the room turned. Elena tried to pull away, but he held fast, his other hand reaching for her waist. "Come on now, don't be shy. Girls like you, you're here for the men's entertainment, aren't you?" Humiliation burned through her like acid. She could feel the judgment, the whispers starting, the assumptions being made about who she was and why she was here. "Let me go," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the terror clawing up her throat. "Not yet," he leered. "Haven't had my dance yet. I believe the lady asked you to let her go." The voice cut through the ballroom like a blade, cold, commanding, absolutely unyielding. Caleb Hartwell stood 10 feet away, his expression carved from stone. But his eyes burned with something dangerous. The drunk patron laughed nervously. "Now, Caleb, don't get all righteous. We're just having a bit of fun. Let her go." The room had gone completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. The man released Elena's arm, stumbling backward. "No harm done, right? Just misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Caleb repeated softly, moving forward with the fluid grace of a predator. "You grabbed a woman without her permission, humiliated her in front of 100 guests, and now you want to call it a misunderstanding." "Caleb," Senator Morrison interjected, his voice tight, "I'm sure Edwards didn't mean any disrespect. Perhaps we should all just—" "No." Caleb stopped 3 feet from Elena, his gaze sweeping over her once, assessing, checking for damage, before returning to Edwards. "You will apologize to the lady, and then you will leave my home." "Lady?" Edwards sneered, emboldened by whiskey and foolishness. "Come on, Caleb, we all know what she is. Seamstress?" He snorted. "Is that what you're calling them now?" The insult hung in the air like poison. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually hit the man. Instead, he did something far more shocking. He turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. And then he smiled, a slight, deliberate curve of his mouth that didn't reach his eyes, but somehow changed everything. "Gentlemen," he said softly, never breaking eye contact with Elena, "let me clarify any confusion." He reached for her hand, and Elena, too stunned to resist, let him take it. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles, a gesture so intimate, so deliberate, that gasps rippled through the crowd. Then Caleb Hartwell turned to face the ballroom, still holding Elena's hand, and spoke 5 words that would change both their lives forever. "Gentlemen, meet my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened. Margaret Fairfax made a sound like a wounded animal. Victor Fairfax went purple. Senator Morrison's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. And Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell, standing near the doorway, pressed her hand over her mouth to hide what might have been a smile. Caleb's grip on Elena's hand tightened, not painfully, but firmly, as if anchoring them both through the storm he'd just unleashed. "What?" Victor Fairfax finally sputtered. "What are you talking about? You're engaged to my daughter." "A mistake," Caleb said calmly. "One I'm correcting now." He glanced at Margaret, and for the first time that evening his expression softened with genuine regret. "Miss Fairfax, I apologize. This was wrong of me, all of it. But I can't marry you when I'm already married to someone else." "When?" Morrison demanded. "This is insane. When did this alleged marriage take place?" 3 months ago, Caleb said without hesitation. "Privately. In Denver." He looked down at Elena again, and she saw the silent plea in his eyes. "Please, play along. Play just for now." And Elena, who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, who understood desperation and the mathematics of survival, made a choice. She squeezed his hand back. "I'm sorry," she said softly, addressing the room but speaking to the man beside her. "We didn't mean to deceive anyone. We wanted to wait, to tell his family properly, but—" She let her voice trail off, Let them fill in the blanks. This is a lie, Victor Fairfax snarled. A desperate, transparent lie to get out of the engagement. Then prove it, Caleb challenged. Write to the courthouse in Denver. Check the records. You'll find them. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. But he delivered it with such absolute conviction that doubt flickered across Victor's face. Margaret Fairfax had gone very pale. Caleb, she whispered, please, don't do this. For a moment, just a moment, Elena saw something like compassion cross Caleb's face. Then it hardened again into resolve. I'm sorry, Margaret, he said quietly. You deserved the truth, and the truth is I could never give you what you deserved. It's better you know now than years from now. He turned, still holding Elena's hand, and addressed his mother. I apologize for the scene, for all of it. This should have been handled differently. Mrs. Hartwell looked between her son and Elena, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. I think, she said with remarkable composure, that our guests should be leaving now. The party is clearly over. The room erupted. Morrison and Victor both trying to talk over each other, demanding proof, threatening legal action, insisting this was a farce. But Caleb ignored them all. He simply walked toward the door, pulling Elena gently along beside him, leaving the chaos in their wake. They climbed the main staircase in silence, the shouts fading behind them. At the second-floor landing, Caleb finally stopped and released her hand. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough. I had no right to pull you into that. Elena's legs felt shaky. Her hand still tingled where he'd held it. You saved me from that man, from his assumptions about who I am. I made different assumptions, Caleb said. Different, but just as presumptuous. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its neat arrangement. The truth is, I panicked. I saw a way out of that engagement, out of Morrison's control, and I took it without thinking about what it would cost you. What will it cost me? He looked at her then, really looked at her, not at her worn dress or her patched coat, but at her. Everything or nothing. It depends on what happens next. And what happens next? Caleb leaned against the banister, exhaustion settling over him like a physical weight. Tomorrow, Morrison and Fairfax will start investigating. They'll check Denver records. They'll ask questions. When they find no evidence of a marriage, they'll come back here demanding answers. This house will become a battlefield. He met her eyes. Unless we make it real. Elena's heart stopped. Real? Not a real marriage, he said quickly, but a real arrangement, paperwork, documents. Enough evidence to make the lie stick. He straightened and suddenly he was all business, a rancher negotiating a deal. I can pay you, clear any debts you have, set you up with your own seamstress shop somewhere far from here once this is over. All you have to do is pretend to be my wife for 6 months, maybe a year, long enough for the scandal to die down and for me to extract myself from Morrison's political plans. Pretend to be your wife, Elena repeated slowly. In public only. You'd have your own room, your own life. We'd simply have to appear cordial when others are around. His expression turned grim. I know it's a terrible thing to ask, but I'm asking anyway because I'm desperate and because you look like someone who understands desperation. He was right. She did understand. Elena thought of her sister in Denver, alone in that cold cottage, waiting for money that might not come. Thought of the bank papers, the final notice, the deadline that was racing toward them like a runaway train. Thought of the years stretching ahead of her, struggling, surviving, never quite making it. How much? She asked quietly. Caleb named a figure that made her head spin. Enough to save the cottage, enough to open a shop, enough to change everything. And you're sure this will work? No, he admitted, but it's the only option I have left. Elena looked at the stranger who'd claimed her as his wife to save them both from disgrace, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the desperate hope he was trying to hide. He was gambling everything on her cooperation, trusting her with his freedom, his ranch, his future. She thought of Mary's words in the kitchen. We don't get to choose. We do what we must to survive. 1 year, Elena said, and you clear all my family's debts, not just mine. And the shop? I want it in Denver, near my sister. Something like relief flashed across Caleb's face. Done. And one more thing. Elena stepped closer, lifting her chin to meet his eyes directly. When this is over, when we part ways, you don't get to judge how I live my life afterward. You don't get to check on me or have opinions about my choices. We walk away clean, no strings, no guilt. Agreed. He extended his hand. Do we have a bargain? Elena looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, offering her salvation wrapped in deception. She thought about everything that could go wrong, about scandal and shame and the possibility that this lie might destroy them both. Then she thought about her sister's face when Elena could tell her the cottage was safe, about a shop with her name on the window, about a future that wasn't just endurance. She took his hand. We have a bargain. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, sealing their agreement. For better or worse, Elena Cross had just become Elena Hartwell, at least on paper, at least for now. As they stood in the hallway, hands clasped in a deal that felt both like salvation and damnation, neither of them noticed Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell watching from the shadows below, her expression thoughtful. Well, she murmured to herself, this will either be a disaster or the best thing that ever happened to that stubborn boy. Only time would tell which. But downstairs the party was over. The guests were leaving, carrying with them the most scandalous gossip Wyoming had seen in years. And somewhere in the chaos, a lie was taking root. One that would grow into something neither Caleb nor Elena could have predicted. The bargain was struck. Now came the hard part, living with it. The morning sun hadn't yet crested the mountains when Elena woke to find a cream-colored envelope slipped under her door. Inside, written in precise masculine handwriting, was a single line. My study, 7 a.m. We need to make this official. She dressed carefully in her better dress, the blue cotton that had seen her through job interviews and church services, and found her way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet after last night's chaos, the grand rooms stripped of their party finery, revealing elegant bones beneath. Her footsteps echoed on the polished floors. Caleb's study was tucked at the back of the house, facing the eastern hills. She knocked twice before his voice called out, "Come in." He stood behind a massive oak desk covered in papers, dressed in work clothes now, dark trousers, a plain shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. His hair was damp, as if he'd recently bathed, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. Coffee? He gestured to a pot on the sideboard. Please. Elena poured herself a cup with hands that wanted to shake, forcing them steady. The coffee was strong and bitter, grounding her in this impossible reality. Caleb remained standing, studying the papers before him with the focus of a general planning a campaign. I've been working since 4, he said without preamble, trying to anticipate every angle Morrison and Fairfax will use to disprove our marriage. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with uncomfortable directness. They'll investigate everything. Your background, your family, where you've been the past few months. They'll look for inconsistencies. Then we'd better get our story straight, Elena said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Exactly. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. Sit. This will take a while. For the next 2 hours, they built their lie brick by careful brick. They'd met in Denver 4 months ago, Caleb decided, when he'd come to the city on business. Elena had been working in a dress shop, true enough that she could provide details if pressed. They'd been drawn to each other despite their different circumstances. He'd courted her quietly, not wanting his mother to interfere or Morrison to use the connection politically. We married in a small ceremony, Caleb said, making notes. Just us and 2 witnesses we paid for their discretion. No family, no announcement. We intended to tell everyone after the busy season ended, but then Morrison pushed the engagement to Margaret, and I panicked, made the wrong choice, agreed to something I had no right to agree to. Why didn't you tell him about me then? Elena asked, following the logic of the fiction they were creating. Fear, Caleb said simply. Fear he'd find a way to use you against me. That's actually true. Morrison would do exactly that. His jaw tightened. He's been trying to get control of this ranch for years. My father refused him, and I've refused him. An alliance with the Fairfax family would have given him the political leverage to force my hand. And now? Now I've burned that bridge. He looked out the window at the land spreading toward the horizon. Now Morrison is my enemy instead of just my problem. But at least it's honest. Elena sipped her coffee, studying him. In daylight, without the party's chaos, she could see him more clearly, the lines of stress around his eyes, the set of his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried too long alone. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 32 or 33, but he carried himself like someone much older. "What happened to you, CHÈ?" she asked quietly. "You said something to your mother last night, about not wanting to do this to another woman." His expression shuddered instantly. "That's not part of our arrangement." "If we're going to sell this lie, I need to know what broke you," Elena pressed. "People will see it. They'll wonder why a man like you would marry a woman like me in secret. The story needs an emotional truth, even if the facts are fiction." Caleb's hands clenched on the desk. For a long moment, she thought he'd refuse to answer. Then, slowly, he sat down, the motion heavy with resignation. "Her name was Catherine," he said, his voice carefully flat. "We were engaged 6 years ago. Beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. I thought—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought she loved me. Loved this life, this land. We planned everything, the wedding, the future, children we'd raise here." His laugh was bitter. 3 weeks before the ceremony, I found her in the barn with my father's business partner. She told me she could never love someone as rigid and cold as me, that she'd only agreed to the engagement for my money and status. She'd been having the affair for months. Elena's chest tightened with unexpected sympathy. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She was right." Caleb met her eyes, and the emptiness there was worse than anger would have been. "I am rigid. I am cold. I've spent 6 years proving her right, building walls so high that nothing gets in. When Mother and Morrison started pushing the engagement to Margaret, I agreed because it didn't matter. Margaret didn't love me. I didn't love her. It was clean, safe, exactly what I deserved." "That's not true," Elena said before she could stop herself. "You don't know me." "No," she agreed, "but I know what it's like to believe you don't deserve happiness because someone told you that you didn't. My father said I was worthless every day of his life, said I'd never amount to anything, that I was a burden, that the world would be better without me in it." She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "He was wrong, and so was Catherine." Caleb stared at her, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then he looked away, back to his papers, his voice rough when he spoke. "We should continue. Morrison will be here by noon, and we need to be ready." They spent another hour refining their story, memorizing details. The name of the Denver courthouse where they'd supposedly filed papers, the date of their fictional ceremony, the hotel where they'd spent their wedding night. Caleb had already sent his ranch foreman into Denver with instructions to create a paper trail, bribing clerks if necessary to backdate documents. It was risky, probably illegal, but Caleb approached it with the same grim determination he'd probably approached every impossible task in his life. "There's one more thing," he said finally, pushing a sheaf of papers across the desk. "Our actual contract. The real agreement between us, the one no one else will ever see." Elena read through it carefully. The terms were generous, more than generous. $5,000 upon signing, paid directly to clear her family's debts. Another $5,000 at the end of 12 months. The deed to a shop property in Denver, transferred to her name regardless of whether she completed the full term. Room and board at the ranch for the duration. A clothing allowance so she could dress the part of a rancher's wife. "And if I break the contract?" she asked. "You keep everything you've already received. I'm not a monster, Miss Cross. I won't punish you for changing your mind." "Elena," she corrected. "If we're married, you should probably use my first name." "Elena," he repeated, and something about the way he said it, careful, as if testing the shape of it, made her pulse quicken. "There's one more clause, the most important one." He leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. "No romantic feelings, no expectations beyond what we've agreed to. This is a business arrangement. When it ends, we walk away as strangers who did each other a favor. Nothing more." Elena studied the clause, written in that same precise handwriting. Such a simple rule. So easy to agree to when you were sitting across a desk from a man you barely knew, building lies to fool the world. Why? She asked. Why what? Why is that rule so important to you? Caleb's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. Because feelings complicate things. Because people get hurt when expectations don't align with reality. Because I won't survive having someone else look at me the way Catherine did, like I was a disappointment they had to endure. And you think I'd do that? I think anyone would, he said quietly. Given enough time and proximity. So we don't give it time. We maintain boundaries, keep this professional, survive the year and part as friends, if we're lucky. Elena picked up the pen he'd set beside the contract. Friends. It was more than she'd had in months, and far less than the complicated thing building in her chest as she looked at this broken man trying so hard to protect himself. 1 year, she said. No feelings. Just business. Just business, he agreed. She signed her name at the bottom of the contract, Elena Cross, soon to be Elena Hartwell, and slid it back across the desk. Caleb signed below her signature, then pulled out a small box from his desk drawer. You'll need this, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. It was my grandmother's. Mother said you should have something real to wear. Elena's throat tightened as he lifted the ring from its velvet nest. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a thin gold band etched with tiny flowers, worn smooth by years of wear. A ring that had meant something once, that carried the weight of real vows, real love. I can't, she whispered. This is too much. It's just a prop, Caleb said, but his voice was gentler now, like everything else about this arrangement. May I? She extended her left hand and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, settling against her skin like it had always belonged there. His fingers lingered just a moment, warm, calloused, careful, before he pulled away. There, he said, all business again. Now you look like a wife. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Hartwell entered without waiting for permission, her expression a mixture of concern and something that might have been amusement. I thought you'd want to know, she said. Morrison's carriage just came up the drive. He's brought a lawyer. She looked between them, noting the ring on Elena's finger, the signed papers on the desk. Are you two ready for this? No, Caleb said honestly. But we'll manage. Mrs. Hartwell moved to Elena, taking her hand gently to examine the ring. I haven't seen this in 20 years, she murmured. My mother-in-law wore it every day of her marriage, 53 years until the day she died. She looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. I don't know what game you two are playing, or why, but that ring has only ever been worn by women who loved the men they married. Remember that. Before Elena could respond, Mrs. Hartwell swept out of the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. She doesn't know about the contract, Caleb said. No one does except us. As far as the world is concerned, including my family, we're really married. Then we'd better give them a good show, Elena said, standing and smoothing her skirt. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Where do you want me when Morrison arrives? Caleb stood as well, moving around the desk. For the first time since she'd met him, something like a real smile touched his lips. Grim, but genuine. By my side, he said, where a wife belongs. They faced Morrison in the formal parlor, a room that smelled of beeswax and old money. The senator had brought his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Blackwood, who carried a leather case full of documents. Victor Fairfax was notably absent, which suggested he was either too angry to come or already planning something worse. Morrison didn't sit. He paced the room like a caged animal, his face florid with rage, barely contained. This is a farce, he said without preamble. A desperate lie from a desperate man. Did you really think we wouldn't investigate? Investigate all you want, Caleb said calmly. He stood with one hand resting lightly on the small of Elena's back, a gesture of possession that looked natural but felt like lightning against her spine. You'll find marriage papers filed in Denver on July 23rd. You'll find the clerk who processed them. You'll find the witnesses who signed their names. Forged, Morrison spat. All of it forged. Prove it. Blackwood set his case on a side table, extracting a sheaf of papers with methodical precision. We will prove it, Mr. Hartwell. We'll interview every clerk in the Denver courthouse. We'll find the witnesses and question them under oath. We'll trace Miss Cross's movements for the past 6 months, and when we find the inconsistencies, and we will find them, we'll have grounds for fraud charges." "Her name is Mrs. Hartwell," Caleb corrected quietly. "And you're welcome to try." Elena felt his tension through that light touch on her back, felt the effort it cost him to maintain this calm facade. She stepped forward slightly, drawing attention to herself. "Senator Morrison," she said, keeping her voice level, "I understand your anger. This news was unexpected and the timing is unfortunate, but I promise you, our marriage is real." The lie tasted bitter, but she delivered it with the same conviction she'd used to convince landlords she could pay rent she didn't have. "Caleb and I wanted to wait to announce it properly, to give his family time to adjust. We never meant to hurt anyone." Morrison's eyes raked over her dismissively. "You expect me to believe that Caleb Hartwell, one of the wealthiest ranchers in Wyoming, married a penniless seamstress in secret? What did he promise you? What did you demand as payment for this performance?" The insult landed like a slap, but Elena didn't flinch. She'd endured worse. "He promised me nothing except himself," she said, "which is more than some people get in a lifetime of proper marriages." Something shifted in the room, a subtle change in the air, in Morrison's expression. He looked at Elena with new assessment, seeing perhaps that she wasn't as easy a target as he'd assumed. "We'll see," he said finally. "Blackwood, file the investigation request with the territorial court. I want every piece of paper, every witness, every moment of Miss Cross's life examined." He turned to Caleb. "And you, Caleb, you've just made a very expensive mistake. Victor Fairfax is already talking to other ranchers, building a coalition to challenge your water rights. Without the Fairfax alliance, you're vulnerable. I give you 6 months before you come crawling back, begging for help." "Then you'll be waiting a long time," Caleb said. Morrison stormed out, Blackwood following with his documents and his threats. The moment the door closed, Caleb's hand dropped from Elena's back, and he moved to the window, putting distance between them. "That went well?" he said with dark humor. Elena's legs felt weak, the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation now draining away. "He'll really investigate everything?" "Yes, and he'll find exactly what we planted for him to find." Caleb turned, and his expression was hard. "But he's right about the political consequences. Without the Fairfax connection, I've lost allies. Other ranchers will see this as weakness, as emotional instability. They'll test me, try to take advantage." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him look suddenly younger. "I knew this would be difficult. I just didn't anticipate how quickly it would get worse." Mrs. Hartwell entered then, carrying a tea tray with the determination of a woman who believed tea could solve anything. "Well," she said briskly, "that was dramatic. Elena, dear, you handled Morrison beautifully. I almost believed you myself." Elena accepted the teacup gratefully, using it to warm her cold hands. "I've had practice lying to people who thought I was beneath them." "I can imagine." Mrs. Hartwell sat down, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. "Now, we need to discuss practical matters. Caleb, you can't keep Elena hidden away like a guilty secret. People need to see you together, see that this marriage is real. The church social is this Sunday. You'll both attend." "Mother, don't mother me," she said firmly. "You've created this situation. Now you have to live it properly, or Morrison will find every crack in your story. Elena needs proper clothing, proper introduction to society, proper training in how to be the wife of a prominent rancher. And you," she pointed at Caleb, "need to stop looking at her like she's a business associate and start looking at her like a man who's supposedly in love." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm not an actor." "Then learn," Mrs. Hartwell said without sympathy. "Because if you can't convince people that this marriage is real, you'll lose everything. The ranch, your reputation, your freedom from Morrison's schemes. Is your pride worth that much?" The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Caleb looked at Elena, and she saw the question in his eyes. "Can you do this? Can you be what I need you to be?" She thought of the contract upstairs, of the ring on her finger, of the $5,000 already transferred to pay off debts that had haunted her family for years. She thought of her sister's face when Elena had sent the telegram that morning. Everything's going to be all right now. I can do it, she said quietly. Whatever needs to be done. Something like relief crossed Caleb's face. Then we start today. Mother's right. We need to be seen together, to establish patterns that look natural. He set down his teacup with decisive finality. Come with me. I'll show you the ranch, introduce you to the foreman and key workers. We'll ride the property line, have lunch in the south pasture where others can see us. Start building the fiction. I don't ride, Elena admitted. Then you'll ride with me. It'll look romantic. His tone suggested nothing about this would be romantic, just another performance for invisible watchers. They spent the afternoon playing the roles they'd written for themselves. Caleb showed her the cattle operation, the breeding program his father had started and he'd expanded, the irrigation system that made the land profitable. He introduced her to workers who tipped their hats and looked curious, to ranch hands who seemed to know their boss well enough to see his tension but were too polite to comment. And they rode. Elena seated in front of Caleb on his black gelding, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins, his body warm and solid against her back. It should have felt awkward, wrong. Instead, it felt safe in a way Elena hadn't felt in years. You're good at this, she said as they crested a hill overlooking miles of grazing land. At riding? At running a ranch, at taking care of people who depend on you. She glanced back at him. Why did you think you were cold? His arms tightened slightly around her. Because I don't feel things the way I should. Don't connect with people easily. Catherine was right about that. I'm better with cattle and land than with humans. I think you connect just fine, Elena said. You just don't trust it anymore. He didn't answer, but she felt the way his breathing changed, felt the moment when he pulled back emotionally, even though he couldn't pull back physically without dropping her from the horse. They returned as the sun was setting, painting the ranch in shades of gold and amber. Mrs. Hartwell had arranged for Elena's belongings to be moved to a bedroom in the family wing, not Caleb's bedroom, thank heavens, but close enough to maintain appearances. There's a connecting door, Mrs. Hartwell explained as she showed Elena the room. It locks from both sides, so you'll have privacy. But staff will assume you're sleeping together, as married couples do. She paused at the door, studying Elena with shrewd eyes. My son is a complicated man, wounded, stubborn, too honorable for his own good. Whatever arrangement you two have made, I hope you'll be kind to him. I'll try, Elena said honestly. And Elena, I hope he'll be kind to you too. That night, Elena lay in a bed softer than clouds, wearing a borrowed nightgown that probably cost more than every piece of clothing she'd ever owned, and tried to understand what she'd gotten herself into. Through the wall, she could hear Caleb moving around his room, footsteps on hardwood, the sound of a drawer opening, water being poured. They were married, but not married, living together but living separate lives, playing at intimacy while maintaining careful distance. It should have been simple. Just business, just survival, just a year to endure. But as Elena touched the ring on her finger, felt its warmth from her own skin, she wondered if anything involving the human heart had ever been simple, even when you tried to take the heart out of it entirely. Sunday arrived too quickly. The church social was held on the grounds behind the small white chapel that served the scattered ranching community, and it seemed like every family within 50 miles had come to see the spectacle of Caleb Hartwell's mysterious wife. Elena wore a new dress, pale green cotton, that Mrs. Hartwell had somehow produced in 3 days, fitted perfectly to Elena's figure. Her hair was arranged in a style far more elegant than she could have managed alone, twisted and pinned by Mrs. Hartwell's lady's maid with pearl combs that caught the light. You look beautiful, Caleb said when she came downstairs. And though his tone was neutral, his eyes held something warmer, appreciation maybe, or just relief that she looked the part she needed to play. You clean up well yourself, she replied, taking in his dark suit, crisp white shirt, the way he'd tamed his hair into submission. He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fine fabric. Remember, he said quietly as they walked toward the carriage, we're in love. We can't keep our hands off each other. Every touch, every glance has to sell that lie. Just business, Elena murmured, but her heart was beating too fast for it to be just anything. The church grounds were crowded with families spread across blankets, children running between trees, long tables groaning under the weight of covered dishes. Conversations faltered and heads turned as Caleb helped Elena down from the carriage, his hand lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Smile," he whispered, "like you're happy to be here." She smiled. Let him guide her toward the crowd with his hand at the small of her back, that gesture of possession that was becoming dangerously familiar. People parted like water around them, staring, whispering behind hands. "Caleb!" An older woman in a magnificent hat descended on them with the inevitability of weather. "Is this your mysterious bride? You must introduce us immediately." "Mrs. Patterson," Caleb said with genuine warmth. "May I present my wife, Elena?" Elena, Mrs. Patterson runs the largest cattle operation in the Northern Territory and has forgotten more about ranching than I'll ever know. Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes assessed Elena with the same thoroughness she'd probably assess breeding stock. "Married in secret, I hear. How romantic." The word dripped with skepticism. "Tell me, dear, how exactly did you meet my Caleb?" And so began the interrogation, subtle but relentless, as woman after woman approached with questions wrapped in courtesy. Elena answered carefully, sticking to the script she and Caleb had crafted, embellishing with small details that made the lie feel more real. Yes, they'd met in Denver. Yes, it had been sudden. Yes, they were very happy. Through it all, Caleb played his part flawlessly, touching her elbow, her shoulder, her hand, creating an illusion of intimacy through constant, careful contact. He brought her lemonade, fixed her plate with food, stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the soap he'd used that morning. "You're good at this," she murmured during a brief moment of privacy. "I told you, I'm not cold, I'm just careful." His eyes scanned the crowd, always watchful. "And right now, being careful means convincing everyone here that I'm a man so in love with his wife that I can't bear to be more than arm's length away from her. Is it working?" "Look around," he said softly. Elena did, saw the way people watched them, expressions shifting from suspicion to reluctant acceptance, saw younger women looking at them with envy, saw older couples smiling with the satisfaction of witnessing young love. The lie was working. They were selling it. "Caleb Hartwell," a cold voice cut through the pleasant afternoon, "didn't expect to see you here." A man approached, tall, silver-haired, wearing expensive clothes and an expression of pure disdain. Elena didn't need an introduction to know this was Victor Fairfax. "Victor," Caleb said evenly. "How's Margaret?" "Devastated, as you'd imagine, though she's recovering from the humiliation of being jilted better than most women would." Fairfax's eyes cut to Elena, dismissing her in an instant. "I'm sure she'll find a proper husband soon, one who values honor over impulse." "I'm sure she will," Caleb agreed. "She deserves someone who can love her properly." "And you think you're capable of that?" Fairfax gestured at Elena. "With her? A woman you supposedly married in secret rather than give her the dignity of a proper wedding? A woman whose own family isn't even here to celebrate?" Elena felt Caleb tense beside her, felt anger rolling off him in waves. Before he could respond, before he could do something that would shatter their careful facade, she stepped forward. "Mr. Fairfax," she said quietly, "I'm sorry for any pain this situation has caused your daughter. Truly. But I won't apologize for marrying the man I love, even if the circumstances weren't what everyone expected." She reached for Caleb's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "And my family isn't here because they're in Denver, taking care of matters I couldn't handle alone. My husband cleared those debts for me. That's the kind of man he is, one who protects the people he cares about, even when it costs him something." It was the truth wrapped in lies, and it landed with perfect weight. Fairfax's expression flickered, surprise, then calculation, then reluctant respect. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose time will tell what kind of marriage you've really made." He turned to leave, then paused. "But Elena, when this falls apart, and Morrison is making sure it will, don't expect sympathy from people who knew better from the start." He walked away, leaving tension crackling in the air behind him. Elena's hand was still in Caleb's, his grip almost painful now, and when she looked up at him, his expression was carefully blank. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For making that worse. I shouldn't have—" "You were perfect," he said roughly. He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers in a gesture that looked intimate but felt desperate. "Thank you." They stood like that for a heartbeat, two people pretending to be in love while their hearts pounded with fear and adrenaline and something neither wanted to name. Then Caleb stepped back, his expression smoothing into neutrality. "We should go," he said. "We've done what we came to do." On the ride home, Elena watched the land roll past and tried to ignore the lingering warmth of Caleb's hand in hers, the memory of his forehead pressed to hers, the way her body had responded to his nearness, as if it didn't understand the difference between performance and reality. "No feelings," the contract said. "Just business." But as the miles passed in silence, Elena wondered how long they could maintain that rule when every touch, every glance, every moment of manufactured intimacy was teaching their bodies to believe the lie they were telling everyone else. And in the driver's seat, steering the horses with practiced ease, Caleb wondered the same thing and feared the answer. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable, which should have been Elena's first warning. She and Caleb moved through their days like dancers learning complicated choreography. Breakfast together in the morning room where staff could see them, working separately during the day, dinners with Mrs. Hartwell where they maintained the fiction of newlywed contentment, and evenings spent in careful proximity that never quite crossed into genuine intimacy. They were getting better at the small touches, the casual affection that married couples displayed without thinking. Caleb's hand would find the small of her back when they walked through doorways. Elena learned to adjust his collar when it went crooked, her fingers lingering just long enough to suggest familiarity. They developed private jokes, shared glances, the shorthand of people who'd known each other far longer than a few tumultuous weeks. It was all performance. It had to be performance. But Elena was beginning to lose track of where the acting ended, and something more dangerous began. She noticed things about him now. The way he took his coffee, black, strong enough to strip paint, how he rubbed the back of his neck when he was frustrated with paperwork, the small smile that touched his lips when one of the ranch hands told a particularly terrible joke. The careful way he handled everything, as if he'd learned early that carelessness led to disaster. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention. A kind of confused longing quickly shuddered behind neutral professionalism, as if he was trying to solve an equation that kept giving him the wrong answer. "You're staring," he said one evening as they sat in the library, pretending to read while actually just sharing space. "I was thinking," Elena corrected, not bothering to deny it. "About?" "About how strange this is. How we know all these surface things about each other now. Your coffee preference, my hatred of mornings, the way you organize your desk, but we don't really know each other at all." Caleb set down his book, giving her his full attention. "What do you want to know? What makes you happy?" The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, firelight playing across his features. "I don't know anymore," he admitted finally. "I used to think it was the ranch, the land, seeing things grow and thrive under my care, but lately—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Lately? Lately I wonder if I'm just going through motions, surviving instead of living." He looked at her directly, and the honesty in his expression made her chest tight. "What about you? What makes Elena Cross happy?" "Hartwell," she corrected softly. "Legally, anyway." "Hartwell," he agreed, and the way he said her married name sent unexpected warmth through her veins. Elena considered his question seriously. "Creating something beautiful with my hands, making something fit perfectly. Seeing someone put on a dress I made and feel confident, powerful, seen." She smiled slightly. "Small things, I suppose, not grand ambitions." "There's nothing small about creating beauty," Caleb said, "or about making people feel seen." Their eyes held across the space between their chairs, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. The acknowledgement that they were both people who'd learned to find meaning in quiet acts of creation and care because louder joys had been denied to them. Mrs. Hartwell entered then, breaking the moment like a stone through glass. "Oh good, you're both here," she said briskly. "I've had a letter from the Hendersons. They're hosting a harvest dance next Saturday and specifically requested your attendance. It's expected, I'm afraid. Half the territory will be there." Caleb's expression closed immediately. "We'll make an appearance." "You'll do more than appear," his mother said firmly. "You'll dance with your wife. You'll socialize. You'll show everyone that your marriage is solid, despite all of Morrison's whispers and insinuations." She looked at Elena. "Do you dance, dear?" "Not well," Elena admitted. "I never had occasion to learn properly." "Then Caleb will teach you. You have a week." Mrs. Hartwell swept out as decisively as she'd entered, leaving them alone with a new task to navigate. Caleb stood, moving to the center of the room where furniture had been pushed back to accommodate a small open space. "Well," he said, extending his hand. "Shall we?" Elena rose on unsteady legs. "Now." "No time like the present, and we'll need practice if we're going to convince anyone we've danced together before." She took his hand, and he drew her closer than he'd held her yet, one hand at her waist, the other cradling her fingers, leaving barely a breath of space between them. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, smell the cedar and leather scent that seemed to cling to him, feel the solid warmth of his body. "Relax," he murmured. "I won't let you fall." "That's not what I'm worried about," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes searched hers, questioning, but he didn't pursue it. Instead, he began to hum a waltz melody, guiding her through the steps with surprising grace. She stumbled at first, stepping on his feet, apologizing in breathless whispers. But he was patient, adjusting his movements to match hers, holding her steady when she faltered. "You're thinking too much," he said, after she'd tripped over her own feet for the third time. "Stop counting steps and just follow me. Trust me to lead." Trust. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. But Elena closed her eyes, let herself sink into the rhythm of his humming, the firm guidance of his hands, the solid presence of him. And slowly, impossibly, they began to move together. Not perfectly, but together. Her feet found the pattern, her body learned to anticipate his movements, and when she opened her eyes again, they were dancing. "There," Caleb said softly, and something in his voice had changed, gone rough and warm. "See? You can do it." They practiced every evening after that, sometimes with Mrs. Hartwell playing actual music on the piano, sometimes just the two of them in the library, with only Caleb's humming to guide them. With each session, the space between them shrank a fraction more. Elena's hand would drift from his shoulder to the back of his neck. His fingers would spread wider at her waist, pulling her incrementally closer. They stopped talking during the dances, letting the music and movement speak instead, and Elena found herself living for those stolen moments when touching him was required, when closeness was expected, when she could pretend the accelerated beating of her heart was just exertion. The night before the Henderson dance, they practiced longer than usual. Mrs. Hartwell had retired early with a headache, leaving them alone in the library. Rain hammered against the windows, and distant thunder rolled across the plains like a warning. "One more time," Caleb said, though they'd already danced through a dozen songs. "I want to make sure you're comfortable." "I'm comfortable," Elena said, but she moved into his arms anyway, because she was a fool and she wanted any excuse to be close to him. They danced in silence, rain providing percussion, lightning occasionally illuminating the room in stark white flashes. Elena's dress swirled around her legs. Caleb's hands were warm and sure. And somewhere in the midst of the waltz, something shifted. Some invisible line crossed without either of them intending it. His hand slid higher on her back, pulling her flush against him. Her fingers tightened in his, no longer just following, but holding on. Their feet moved in perfect synchronization now, bodies pressed together from chest to thigh, and Elena could feel his heart racing as fast as her own. The music in Caleb's throat died. They stopped moving, but didn't step apart. "Elena," he said, her name rough with warning. "I know," she whispered. "The contract, the rule. No feelings." "No feelings," he agreed, but his hand hadn't left her waist, and his eyes were dark with something that looked nothing like indifference. "We should stop," Elena said. "We should," Caleb agreed. Neither of them moved. The rain intensified, drumming against the house like it was trying to get inside. Thunder cracked closer now, shaking the windows. And in the flickering firelight, with storm shadows dancing across the walls, Elena made a choice that would change everything. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was meant to be brief, a moment of weakness, quickly regretted and never repeated. But the instant her lips touched his, Caleb made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back with the desperation of a man who'd been denying himself water in the desert. His hand fisted in the fabric of her dress, her fingers tangled in his hair, and the careful distance they'd maintained for weeks shattered like glass. Caleb pulled back first, breathing hard, his expression a mixture of desire and something that looked like panic. "We can't," he said roughly. "Elena, we agreed." "I know what we agreed," she said, her own breathing unsteady. "And I'm breaking the agreement. I'm breaking the rule." She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "I have feelings, Caleb. I've had them for weeks now, and I'm tired of pretending I don't." "Don't," he said, but it came out like a plea. "Don't do this. Don't give me something I can't keep." "Who says you can't keep it?" "I do." He stepped back, putting distance between them with visible effort. "I'm not capable of this, Elena. Whatever you think you feel, whatever I might feel, it doesn't matter. I told you what happened with Catherine. I can't survive that again. Won't survive it." "I'm not Catherine," Elena said quietly. "I know." His laugh was bitter. "That's what makes this worse. You're nothing like her. You're kind and brave, and you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. You make me want things I gave up wanting years ago." He ran both hands through his hair, destroying its careful order. "But wanting doesn't change what I am. I'm still the cold, rigid man she said I was. Still someone who will eventually disappoint you, fail you, make you regret the day you walked into this house." "That's not true." "It is true," he said with devastating certainty. "I've proven it over and over. Every relationship I've had, every friendship I've tried to maintain, they all end the same way, with people realizing I'm not worth the effort it takes to care about me." Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You're wrong. You're so wrong about yourself that it breaks my heart." "Then we're both broken," Caleb said. "Because I can't be what you need, and you can't be what I promised myself I'd never want again." He moved toward the door, then paused without turning back. "Get some sleep. The dance is tomorrow, and we still have to convince everyone we're happily married." He left her standing in the library, the ghost of his kiss still burning on her lips, her heart cracking open like the sky outside. Elena sank into the nearest chair, pressing her hand over her mouth to hold back a sob. She'd known the rules, had agreed to them, signed her name to them, had promised herself she wouldn't be foolish enough to fall for a man who'd explicitly told her he couldn't love her back. But somewhere between the first careful touch and the last desperate kiss, she'd stopped being able to tell the difference between the woman she was pretending to be and the woman she was becoming. She'd fallen in love with Caleb Hartwell, not the role he played, but the real man beneath it, the one who worked himself to exhaustion caring for his land and his people, who read poetry when he thought no one was watching, who'd held her so carefully while teaching her to dance, as if she were something precious that might break. And now she had to figure out how to survive the rest of their agreement, knowing he'd never love her back. The Henderson dance was everything Elena had dreaded, and worse. The house blazed with light against the autumn darkness, music spilling from open windows, carriages arriving in a steady stream to deposit guests in their finest clothing. Elena wore a new gown, deep burgundy silk that Mrs. Hartwell had somehow procured, with tiny jet beads that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was arranged in elaborate curls, pearl combs securing it in place. She looked like she belonged among these people. Felt like an imposter playing dress-up. "You're stunning," Caleb said when she descended the stairs, and his voice was professionally neutral, as if last night had never happened. "Thank you," Elena replied with equal formality. They rode to the Henderson ranch in strained silence, the space between them on the carriage seat feeling wider than miles. Caleb kept his hands to himself, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, his expression carefully blank. Only the white-knuckled grip on the reins suggested any internal turmoil. "Caleb," Elena started, needing to say something, anything to breach the awful distance between them. "Not now," he said quietly. "Please. I can't. Not now." So they arrived at the dance in silence and stepped into performance mode with the ease of long practice. Caleb's hand found its place at her waist. Elena smiled and greeted guests. They moved through the crowd as a unit, all surface polish with nothing but aching emptiness underneath. The dancing began an hour in, couples swirling across the Hendersons' grand ballroom to a live orchestra that played far better than Mrs. Hartwell's piano efforts. Caleb led Elena onto the floor for the first waltz, and her traitorous body responded instantly to his touch. Pulse quickening, breath shortening, every nerve ending suddenly awake. "Just like we practiced," he murmured, guiding her into the pattern they'd rehearsed 100 times. But it wasn't like they'd practiced. Those dances had been building toward something, each one pulling them incrementally closer. These steps were careful, measured, maintaining proper distance between them, like that space was the only thing keeping them safe. "You're doing well," Caleb said as they turned, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I have a good partner." His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. "Elena, I know," she said quickly. "I know. You don't need to say it again. I understand." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to show him she meant it. "We'll get through this year. We'll honor the contract, and then we'll walk away exactly like we planned." Something that looked like pain flickered across his face, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Thank you," he said, "for understanding, for not making this harder than it has to be." The music ended. They separated with appropriate reluctance for appearance's sake, and Elena let herself be swept into conversation with other women while Caleb discussed cattle prices and water rights with the men. It was civilized, professional, exactly what their arrangement required. It felt like slowly bleeding out. Hours passed in a blur of forced smiles and meaningless conversation. Elena danced with other men, local ranchers, Morrison's business associates who were clearly reporting back to him, even James Hartwell, who looked at her with too much understanding in his eyes. "He's an idiot," James said as they moved through a country dance. "My brother, I mean. Whatever happened between you two, he's handling it like an idiot." "Nothing happened," Elena said automatically. "Right, and I'm the King of England." James spun her expertly. "For what it's worth, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Catherine, and we all thought he'd die when she left him." "He looks at me like I'm a business obligation," Elena said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "He looks at you like you're the sun, and he's terrified of burning," James corrected. "There's a difference." Before Elena could respond, the orchestra struck up another waltz, and Caleb appeared at her elbow, tension radiating from him like heat. "Cutting in," he said to his brother without preamble. James stepped back with a knowing smile. "She's all yours, brother." Caleb pulled Elena into his arms with less care than he'd shown all evening, his grip firm enough to border on possessive. They moved through the dance in silence, but something had changed. The careful distance was gone, replaced by an almost aggressive closeness that made Elena's breath catch. "What did James say to you?" Caleb asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Nothing important." "Don't lie to me." Elena looked up at him, saw the carefully controlled expression that couldn't quite hide what burned beneath. "He said you're an idiot, and that you look at me like I'm the sun." Caleb's jaw clenched. "He talks too much." "Does he? Or does he just say things you don't want to hear?" "Elena." "No," she interrupted. "You don't get to shut me down again. You kissed me back last night, Caleb. You kissed me like you were drowning and I was air. So don't stand there and pretend you feel nothing." "What I feel doesn't matter," he said roughly. "What I feel is irrelevant to what I can actually give you. And what if I don't need you to give me anything except honesty?" She kept her voice low, conscious of the other dancers swirling around them. "What if all I want is for you to stop hiding behind rules you invented to keep yourself safe from living?" His eyes blazed. "You have no idea what you're asking." "Then tell me. Tell me what I'm asking that's so impossible." The music was building toward its crescendo. Caleb pulled her closer, his mouth near her ear, and said words that cut like a blade. "You're asking me to believe I deserve to be loved, and I can't. I've tried, Elena. For weeks I've tried to convince myself that maybe this time could be different. Maybe you're right and I'm not the cold, broken man Catherine said I was. But I can't silence the voice that tells me I'll eventually fail you the way I've failed everyone else. That voice is louder than any music, any kiss, any moment of feeling something other than empty." The admission broke something in Elena's chest. She stopped moving, forcing him to stop too, and looked up at him with tears she no longer bothered to hide. Then you're not just protecting yourself, she said softly. You're protecting me from having to love someone who refuses to believe he's lovable, and that's the cruelest thing you could do. Before he could respond, the music ended. Polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Elena stepped out of his arms and walked away, heading for the veranda where cold air might clear her head and no one could see her cry. She found a quiet corner behind a trellis of dying roses and let the tears come, furious with herself for breaking the one rule she'd promised to keep. She'd known better, had been warned explicitly. And still she'd been stupid enough to fall in love with a man who'd told her exactly why he couldn't love her back. Elena. She turned to find Caleb standing a few feet away, his expression raw with something she'd never seen before. Vulnerability, real and unguarded. Please go, she whispered. I can't do this right now. I can't leave you crying. He moved closer, and she saw his hands were shaking. Elena, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for hurting you. Sorry for being exactly what Catherine accused me of being. Sorry for— Stop, Elena said fiercely. Stop apologizing for being hurt. Stop punishing yourself for what she did to you. Catherine was wrong, Caleb. She was cruel and wrong, and you've spent 6 years believing her lies because it was easier than risking your heart again. It's not easier, he said, his voice breaking. It's agony. Every morning I wake up knowing you're just down the hall, knowing you're pretending to be my wife while I'm pretending I don't want you to be my wife in truth. It's torture, Elena, but it's safer than— Than what? She demanded. Than letting yourself be happy? Than taking a chance that maybe, just maybe, I meant it when I said I have feelings for you? Then watching you realize I'm not worth loving, he said, and the naked fear in his voice made her heart break all over again. Then seeing the day when you look at me the way she did, with disappointment and regret and relief that you're finally free. Elena closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I am not Catherine, she said clearly, and you are not the man she described. You're honorable and kind, and you care so deeply about everything that you've taught yourself not to care at all because feeling things hurts too much. But I see you, Caleb. I see who you really are beneath all that armor you've built. And I love you anyway. He flinched like she'd struck him. Don't. I love you, she repeated more firmly. I love the way you check on your cattle every morning before the sun rises. I love how you remember everyone's names and ask about their families. I love that you read poetry in secret and can't carry a tune but hum anyway when we dance. I love that you're trying so hard to protect me from yourself that you're willing to break both our hearts rather than risk being hurt again. Elena, please, I love you, she said for the third time, and this time it came out fierce, defiant. And you can spend the rest of this year pushing me away, and you can watch me walk away at the end like we agreed, but you can't make me unlove you. That ship has sailed, so either accept it and let yourself love me back, or at least do me the courtesy of admitting you're just too scared to try. The words hung between them like thrown gauntlets. Caleb stared at her, his chest heaving, his careful control finally shattering. She watched it happen, watched the walls crack, the armor splinter, watched everything he'd been holding back come flooding into his eyes. I'm terrified, he admitted roughly. I'm absolutely terrified of this, of you, of what I feel every time you walk into a room. I'm terrified that I'll wake up one day and you'll have figured out what Catherine knew, that I'm fundamentally lacking something essential, something that makes other people capable of the kind of love that lasts. You're not lacking anything, Elena said. You're just convinced you are, and that's not the same thing. How do you know? The question came out desperate, pleading. How can you possibly know I won't hurt you? I don't, she said simply. That's what makes it love instead of a business arrangement. It's choosing to trust someone with your heart even when there are no guarantees, even when it's terrifying. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm rolling in across the plains. Wind picked up, sending dried rose petals skittering across the veranda. And in that moment, with music drifting from the ballroom and rain beginning to spatter against the stones, Caleb made a choice. He kissed her. Not carefully this time, not with measured restraint or professional distance. He kissed her like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater and finally broke the surface. His hands cradled her face, his body pressed against hers, and Elena felt him surrender, felt the walls come down, the fear give way to something fiercer and more honest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words rough but real. "Heaven help me, Elena. I've been falling in love with you since you signed that damned contract. Maybe before that, when you stood in my ballroom wearing that patched coat and refused to be intimidated by people who thought they were better than you." Joy exploded in Elena's chest, bright and sharp. "Say it again." "I love you." He kissed her temple, her cheekbone, the corner of her mouth. "I love you. And I'm terrified, and I have no idea how to do this without the safety net of rules and contracts. But I'm willing to try if you are." "I'm willing," Elena said, laughing through tears. "I've been willing for weeks, you stubborn man." He kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and claiming. His hand slid down her back, pulling her close, and Elena felt the tension that had lived between them for weeks transform into something else entirely, something sustainable, something real. "We should go back inside," Caleb murmured against her lips. "Before people notice we're missing." "Let them notice," Elena said recklessly. "Let them see that we're really married, really in love. No more pretending." He pulled back just far enough to look at her, his expression full of wonder and residual fear. "What about the contract, the agreement?" "Tear it up," Elena said. "I don't want your money or your shop or any of the things we agreed to. I just want you, the real you, not the performance." "You'll have me," he promised. "All of me, even the broken parts. Especially the broken parts because you're the only person who's ever made me think they might not be broken after all." They stood together in the rain, holding each other as the storm intensified, and Elena thought about rules and contracts and the careful distance they'd maintained for weeks. About how safety sometimes required walls, but living required doors. Caleb had finally opened his, and Elena was walking through without hesitation, choosing love over certainty, choosing him over all the reasonable objections her practical mind could offer. It was reckless. It was terrifying. It was exactly right. When they returned to the ballroom, soaked from rain, hands clasped tight, everyone could see the change. Something fundamental had shifted between them, transformed pretense into truth. The whispers started immediately, speculation about what had happened on that veranda, why Caleb Hartwell looked at his wife like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. Let them whisper, Elena thought. Let them wonder. She was done hiding what she felt, done pretending their arrangement was anything less than the most real thing in her life. They danced one more time before leaving, and this dance was different from all the others. No measured distance, no careful performance, just two people moving together, finally honest about what lived between them. "What happens now?" Elena asked as they swayed. "I don't know," Caleb admitted, "but we'll figure it out together." "No more contracts?" "No more contracts," he agreed. "Just us. Just this. Just love," Elena thought. Complicated and terrifying and absolutely worth every risk. The rule was broken, and neither of them had ever been happier about breaking something in their lives. The joy lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days of waking up to Caleb's arms around her, of sharing coffee in the morning with genuine smiles instead of careful performance, of dancing in the library just because they wanted to, not because they needed to practice. 3 days of Elena believing that love might actually be enough, that breaking down walls was the hard part and everything after would be easier. She should have known better. The first crack appeared at breakfast on the 4th morning. Caleb was reading the territorial newspaper, his expression growing progressively darker when he suddenly slammed the paper down hard enough to make the dishes rattle. "That son of a—" He caught himself, glancing at his mother and Elena. "Apologies, but Morrison has outdone himself this time." "What is it?" Mrs. Hartwell asked, her tone suggesting she already suspected. "He's filed a formal complaint with the territorial court, demanding an investigation into fraudulent marriage claims. Says he has evidence that our marriage license was backdated, that we bribed officials, that the whole thing is a conspiracy to defraud the Fairfax family." Caleb's jaw clenched so hard Elena could see the muscle jumping. "He's asking the court to nullify the marriage and charge us both with fraud." Elena's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "He can try," Caleb said grimly. "And with the right judge, the right political pressure, he might succeed. Morrison has connections throughout the territory. He's been building toward this since the engagement party." Mrs. Hartwell set down her teacup with careful precision. Then we'll fight it. We'll hire the best lawyers. We'll lose, Caleb interrupted. Because he's right, Mother. The license was backdated. The witnesses were paid. Everything he's accusing us of, we actually did. He looked at Elena, and she saw fear beneath the anger. If this goes to trial, Elena could face criminal charges. Prison time, fines she can't afford, her name destroyed throughout the territory. Then we tell the truth, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. We explain why we did it, that we were trying to protect you from a forced marriage, that no one was actually harmed. The truth makes it worse, Caleb said flatly. The truth is we conspired to commit fraud, used false documents, and deceived an entire community. The fact that we fell in love afterward doesn't erase what we did before. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Elena felt cold seeping into her bones despite the warm morning sun streaming through the windows. What are you saying? She asked quietly. Caleb stood, pacing to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. I'm saying I made a catastrophic mistake. I thought I could outsmart Morrison, thought I could protect the ranch and my freedom with a clever lie. Instead, I've put you in danger. You, who had nothing to do with any of this political maneuvering, who only came here looking for honest work. He pressed his palm flat against the window glass. I've destroyed you to save myself, and I can't live with that. Caleb, no. He turned, and his expression was so carefully neutral that Elena's heart stuttered with recognition. The walls were going back up. I need to think. I need to figure out how to fix this without dragging you down with me. He left without another word, his breakfast untouched, his coffee growing cold in the cup. Mrs. Hartwell reached across the table, covering Elena's hand with her own. Give him time, she said softly. When Caleb is frightened, he retreats. It's how he survived everything life has thrown at him. I'm not Catherine, Elena said, her voice breaking. I won't leave him because things got difficult. I know, dear, but does he? The question haunted Elena for the rest of the day. Caleb didn't come to lunch, didn't appear for dinner. She finally found him after dark in the barn, sitting on a hay bale and staring at nothing, a half-empty whiskey bottle beside him. Drinking alone? She said softly, announcing her presence. That's not like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. His words weren't slurred, but they carried the weight of too much whiskey and too little hope. Elena sat beside him, not touching, giving him space. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking I should have let Morrison force me into that marriage with Margaret. Would have been cleaner, safer. No one would have gotten hurt except me, and I'm used to being hurt. He took another drink. Instead, I dragged you into my mess, made you complicit in my schemes, and now you're facing criminal charges because I was too cowardly to face my own life. That's not what happened, isn't it? He looked at her finally, and his eyes were hollow. I saw you standing in that ballroom, vulnerable and alone, and I used you. Told myself it was helping both of us, but really I just grabbed the nearest escape route without caring what it would cost you. I made my own choice, Elena said firmly. I knew the risks. I signed that contract with open eyes. You signed it because you were desperate, because you had debts you couldn't pay and a sister depending on you and nowhere else to turn. His laugh was bitter. I took advantage of that desperation, dressed it up as a business arrangement, and convinced myself I was being honorable. But I wasn't. I was being selfish. Elena felt anger rising through her fear. So what's your solution? Push me away. Rebuild those walls you just tore down? Prove Catherine right by becoming exactly the cold, closed-off man she accused you of being? My solution is to protect you from the consequences of my mistakes. He set down the bottle with careful deliberation. Morrison's lawyer was here this afternoon while you were out riding. He made me an offer. Cold dread settled in Elena's stomach. What kind of offer? If I agree to annul the marriage, admit the fraud publicly, and accept penalties including significant fines and restrictions on my business dealings, Morrison will drop all charges against you. Your name will be cleared. You'll walk away from this with the money I've already paid you and no criminal record. And you? I'll be ruined, Caleb said simply. Reputation destroyed, business crippled, probably lose a significant portion of the ranch to pay the fines. But you'll be safe. That's what matters. No. Elena stood, hands clenched into fists. Absolutely not. We fight this together. There is no together, Caleb said, and his voice was so flat, so empty, that it took her breath away. There's you with your whole life ahead of you, and there's me paying for my mistakes. That's how this ends. That's how you're choosing to end it, Elena corrected, fury and heartbreak warring in her chest. You're choosing to give up, choosing to believe you don't deserve to be happy, choosing to push away the one person who loves you because accepting that love requires courage you don't think you have. He flinched, but didn't argue. 3 days ago, you told me you loved me, Elena continued, her voice shaking. You kissed me in the rain and promised we'd figure things out together. Was that a lie? Or are you just that quick to run when things get hard? It's not running, Caleb said quietly. It's accepting reality. I made a mistake falling in love with you, Elena. Not because you're not worth loving, you're worth more than I could ever deserve, but because loving me has put you in danger. The kindest thing I can do is let you go before Morrison destroys you. The kindest thing you can do is trust me to make my own choices about what risks I'm willing to take. Elena's hands were shaking now, her whole body trembling with emotion too big to contain. But you can't do that, can you? Because trusting me means believing I might actually stay, and you're so convinced you're unlovable that you'll sabotage anything good that comes into your life to prove yourself right. Maybe I will, he said, standing to face her. Maybe I'm exactly that broken. But broken or not, I won't let Morrison destroy you to punish me. Tomorrow, I'm signing the agreement. The marriage ends. You'll have everything we agreed to originally, plus additional compensation for the emotional distress I've caused. I don't want your money, Elena said, tears streaming down her face now. I want you. I want us. I want the life we could have together if you just stop being so damned afraid of being happy. Then you want something I can't give you. His expression was carved from stone, every bit of vulnerability locked away behind walls that suddenly seemed impenetrable. I'm sorry, Elena, truly, but this is how it has to end. He walked past her, out of the barn, leaving her standing alone in the darkness with the smell of hay and horses and the sound of her own breaking heart. Elena sank back onto the hay bale, pressing her hands over her face, and let herself cry. For 3 days, she'd believed in second chances, believed that love could heal old wounds, that choosing courage over fear meant something. But Caleb was choosing fear, choosing to believe Morrison's threats over her promises, choosing to save her from dangers she was willing to face if it meant staying by his side. She'd told him she wasn't Catherine, but he was treating her exactly the same, assuming she'd eventually leave, so he was leaving first. Making it clean, making it hurt, making absolutely certain he'd never have to risk being abandoned again. The cruelest part was understanding why. Elena saw the logic that made sense inside his scarred heart, saw how every painful experience in his life had taught him that love was temporary, that people left, that trusting anyone with your happiness was just setting yourself up for inevitable disappointment. She understood. She just couldn't accept it. Elena dried her tears with shaking hands and made her way back to the house. Mrs. Hartwell was waiting in the kitchen, her expression knowing. He told you, she said. It wasn't a question. He told me he's giving up, Elena corrected, signing Morrison's agreement, ending the marriage, sacrificing everything to protect me from consequences I'm willing to face. Mrs. Hartwell sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. That boy, that stubborn, self-destructive boy. She pulled out a chair, gesturing for Elena to sit. Let me tell you something about my son. His father, my husband, was a hard man, not cruel, but demanding. Expected Caleb to be strong, stoic, unshakable. When Caleb was 8, his favorite horse broke its leg. He cried, and his father punished him for it. Said men don't cry over animals, that weakness gets you killed on the frontier. She poured tea with steady hands. From that day forward, Caleb learned to bury everything he felt, became the perfect son, the perfect rancher, the perfect man. And when Catherine destroyed him, it just confirmed what he'd always believed, that showing vulnerability, needing anyone, letting yourself feel anything too deeply, it all leads to pain. So he's choosing pain on his own terms, Elena said. Pain he controls. Exactly. And I don't know how to reach him anymore. Mrs. Hartwell's voice cracked. I've watched him hollow himself out for years, watched him survive instead of live, and just when I thought you might be the one to pull him back, she shook her head. Morrison knew exactly what he was doing, knew that threatening you would make Caleb fold. It's not about the ranch or the money or even his reputation. It's about making Caleb hurt the people he loves before they can hurt him. Then Morrison wins, Elena said bitterly, unless you fight for him. Elena looked up sharply. He doesn't want me to fight. He wants me to take the safe option and walk away. He wants you to prove him right, Mrs. Hartwell corrected. He wants you to leave like Catherine did, so he can tell himself he knew all along it wouldn't last. But what if you don't give him that satisfaction? What if you stay and fight, not just for him, but for both of you? How? He's made up his mind. Then change it. Mrs. Hartwell reached across the table, gripping Elena's hands. You love my son. I've seen it in the way you look at him, the way you've gently, carefully helped him learn to feel again. Don't give up on him now, not when he needs you most, even if he's too blind and scared to see it. Elena wanted to. Every fiber of her being wanted to fight for Caleb, for them, for the life they could have together. But she was so tired of fighting, tired of being brave, tired of loving someone who seemed determined to push her away for her own good. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she whispered. You're strong enough, Mrs. Hartwell said with absolute certainty. You survived poverty, loss, hardship, and came out the other side still capable of loving generously. You're exactly strong enough. The question is whether you believe you deserve to fight for your own happiness. The words hit like a revelation. Elena had spent so much time thinking about whether Caleb believed he deserved to be loved that she'd never questioned whether she believed she deserved to be loved back, whether she believed her happiness was worth fighting for, even when the person she loved was pushing her away. What do I do? Elena asked. Tomorrow morning, Caleb is meeting Morrison's lawyer to sign the agreement. You have until then to change his mind, or you accept his choice and walk away. Mrs. Hartwell squeezed her hands once more before releasing them. But Elena? If you do walk away, make sure it's because you chose to, not because he convinced you that you weren't worth fighting for. Elena spent a sleepless night alternating between fury and heartbreak, planning speeches and abandoning them, trying to figure out how to reach a man who'd locked himself away behind walls built from years of pain and disappointment. By dawn, she still didn't have a perfect answer, but she had clarity about one thing. She wasn't going to let Caleb make this decision alone for both of them without her having one final say. She found him in his study at first light, already dressed in his formal suit, papers spread across his desk. He looked up when she entered, and something that might have been relief crossed his face before being quickly suppressed. Elena, I thought you'd be sleeping. I couldn't sleep knowing you were about to make the biggest mistake of your life, she said, closing the door behind her. We need to talk. There's nothing left to say. I'm meeting Morrison's lawyer at 8. The decision is made. Your decision, Elena corrected. Not ours. You're deciding my future without asking what I want. I know what you want, Caleb said tiredly. You want us to fight Morrison together, face whatever consequences come, stand side by side against the world. It's romantic, it's brave. It's also incredibly naive. What's naive about two people refusing to let a bully dictate their lives? What's naive is thinking love conquers all, he said, and there was so much weariness in his voice that Elena's anger faltered. Morrison has power, money, political connections. He has judges in his pocket and lawyers who'll tie us up in court for years. Even if we fight and somehow win, the cost will be astronomical. Legal fees, lost business, years of stress and uncertainty. And through all of that, you'd be tied to me, unable to move forward with your life, watching me slowly get crushed under pressure I created. You're not giving me credit for understanding what I'm choosing, Elena said. I'm giving you the chance to choose differently. Caleb stood, moving around the desk to face her directly. Elena, I love you. I meant that when I said it. But love doesn't change facts. The fact is I put you in danger with my schemes. The fact is Morrison will destroy you to hurt me unless I give him what he wants. The fact is letting you go now, while you still have a future, is the most loving thing I can do. The most loving thing you can do is trust me, Elena said desperately. Trust that I know what I'm risking. Trust that I'm strong enough to weather whatever storm comes. Trust that I love you enough to stay, even when it gets hard." "I can't," he said simply, and the honesty in those two words broke her heart. "I can't trust that you'll stay, because everyone leaves eventually." Catherine left. "My father died and left me with more responsibility than any 19-year-old should carry. Friends I thought were loyal chose Morrison's side when it became politically expedient. I've learned that people are loyal until it costs them something, and then they're gone. I can't watch you realize that loving me costs too much and see the moment you decide to leave." "So you're leaving first," Elena said, tears streaming down her face now. "You're making sure I can't choose to stay by forcing me out before I have the chance to prove you wrong." "I'm setting you free," Caleb corrected, but his own voice was thick with emotion. "Before it's too late. Before Morrison ruins you. Before you waste years of your life on a man who's too damaged to ever give you the uncomplicated, joyful love you deserve." Elena looked at this man she loved, saw the tears he was fighting to contain, saw the way his hands shook as he stood there trying to be strong enough to push her away. And she understood that no argument would reach him. No speech would convince him. He decided what had to happen, and his stubborn, self-destructive nobility wouldn't let him see any other option. "You're right," she said quietly, and watched shock flash across his face. "What?" "You're right. You're too damaged to give me uncomplicated love. You're too scared to trust that I might actually stay. You're too convinced of your own unworthiness to accept that someone could love you despite your flaws and mistakes." She moved closer, placing one hand over his heart. "But here's what you're wrong about. I don't want uncomplicated love. I don't want someone who's never been broken. I want you, scared, flawed, convinced you're going to fail me. I want you fighting through your fear to choose love anyway. I want you trusting me even when it terrifies you. That's what real love is, Caleb. Not the absence of fear, but courage despite it." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his chest where his heart thundered. "Elena, I'm going to leave now," she continued, her voice steady despite the tears. "I'm going to pack my things and be gone before you meet Morrison's lawyer. Not because you're forcing me out, but because I'm choosing to go. Choosing to show you what it feels like when someone actually leaves you, so you understand the difference between that and someone fighting to stay." She rose on her toes, kissing his cheek gently. "When you're ready to stop being a coward, when you're ready to believe that love is worth the risk, you know where to find me. But I won't wait forever, Caleb. Eventually, even the people who love you most run out of chances to give." She pulled away from him and walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob, giving him one last opportunity to stop her, to choose differently, to be brave enough to fight for them. He said nothing. Elena left the study, climbed the stairs to her room, and packed her single bag with the same worn clothes she'd arrived with months ago. She left the beautiful dresses Mrs. Hartwell had given her, left the pearl combs and silk stockings, left everything except what she'd brought with her because she wanted nothing from this house except the man who was too afraid to let himself be loved. Mrs. Hartwell found her in the hallway. "You're leaving." "I'm forcing his hand," Elena said. "He needs to understand what he's choosing, what he's losing." "And if he lets you go?" "Then I'll know I tried everything." Elena hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you for believing I was worth fighting for, even when your son couldn't." "He'll realize," Mrs. Hartwell said fiercely. "He's stubborn, but he's not stupid. He'll realize what he's lost and come for you." "I hope you're right," Elena picked up her bag. "But I'm done hoping he'll change. He has to want to change, has to want me enough to face his fear." She walked down the grand staircase for the last time, through the entrance hall where this whole complicated mess had begun, and out the front door into the morning sunlight. The stage to Denver didn't leave until afternoon, but she'd walk to town if she had to. Anything to be gone before Caleb signed away their marriage, their future, their chance at happiness. Behind her, the house stood silent. No one ran after her. No voice called her back. Elena kept walking, her heart breaking with every step, and prayed that leaving was the thing that would finally make Caleb understand what he was too afraid to fight for. Inside his study, Caleb stood at the window and watched her go, watched her walk down the drive with her worn bag, and her straight spine, and her absolute certainty that he was making a mistake. Part of him wanted to run after her, wanted to beg her to stay, Wanted to be brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, she meant it when she said she'd weather any storm to be with him. But the bigger part, the part that had been wounded too many times, stayed rooted in place. Let her go. Told himself it was for the best. Convinced himself that he was protecting her, even as his heart shattered into pieces that might never be whole again. At precisely 8 o'clock, Morrison's lawyer arrived. Caleb signed the papers with a steady hand, agreed to terms that would cripple his business for years, and accepted the complete destruction of his reputation in exchange for Elena's safety. The lawyer left satisfied. Morrison had won. And Caleb sat in his empty study, in his empty house, with his empty heart, and wondered if protecting someone from yourself counted as love when it felt exactly like dying. The ranch felt wrong without her. Caleb noticed it immediately. The silence at breakfast, the empty chair across from him, the way his coffee tasted bitter, even though it was made exactly the same as always. He told himself it was temporary discomfort, that he'd adjust, that he'd made the right choice, even if it hurt like hell. He was wrong on all counts. 3 days after Elena left, he still found himself turning to share observations with her before remembering she wasn't there. 5 days in, he caught himself humming the waltz they'd danced to, then stopped abruptly when he realized what he was doing. A week gone, and he'd stopped sleeping entirely, lying awake in his bed knowing she was just down the hall. Except she wasn't, not anymore, and the connecting door between their rooms stood open like an accusation. Mrs. Hartwell watched him with increasing exasperation, finally confronting him over dinner on the 8th night. "You look terrible," she said without preamble. "Thank you, Mother. Your concern is touching." "My concern is that you're dying by inches and too stubborn to admit you made a mistake." She set down her fork with a sharp click. "Elena is gone. You got exactly what you claimed you wanted. So why do you look like you're attending your own funeral?" "I'm fine." "You're miserable. You haven't eaten properly in a week. You work yourself to exhaustion every day and still can't sleep at night. The ranch hands are starting to worry. They say you're distracted, making mistakes you'd never normally make." She leaned forward, her expression fierce. "You saved her from Morrison's threats, Caleb. Congratulations. Now you're both suffering, her in Denver, alone with a broken heart, and you here, slowly destroying yourself, trying to pretend you don't care." "I do care," Caleb said quietly. "That's why I let her go." "No, you let her go because you're a coward." The word hit like a physical blow. Caleb's hands clenched on his napkin. "I protected her. From what? From loving you? From choosing to stand by you through difficult times? From having any agency in her own life?" His mother's voice rose with anger. "You didn't protect her, Caleb. You made her decisions for her, just like Morrison tried to make your decisions for you. You became exactly what you were fighting against. That's not fair." "Life isn't fair, and neither is love. Elena knew the risks. She chose you anyway, and instead of honoring that choice, you threw it back in her face and told her she wasn't capable of deciding what she could handle." Mrs. Hartwell stood, her napkin falling to the floor. "Your father would be ashamed of you, not for falling in love, not for making mistakes, but for being too afraid to fight for your own happiness." She left him sitting alone at the dining table, her words echoing in the empty room. Caleb stared at his untouched meal and felt something crack inside his chest, a hairline fracture in the armor he'd built so carefully over the years. Had he really become like Morrison? Taking away Elena's choice, deciding what was best for her without asking what she wanted? He pushed away from the table and retreated to his study, the one room where he'd always been able to think clearly. But tonight, even this sanctuary felt wrong. The chair where Elena had sat while they built their elaborate lie. The desk where they'd signed the contract. The space near the fireplace where she'd stood and told him she loved him, brave and certain while he'd been terrified and doubting. Caleb moved to that spot now, pressing his palm against the cool stone of the fireplace, and let himself really think about what he'd done. He'd told himself he was protecting Elena, being noble, sacrificing his own happiness for her safety. But standing here in the place where she'd offered him everything and he'd been too scared to take it, Caleb could see the truth his mother had named. He hadn't been protecting Elena. He'd been protecting himself. Because if Elena had stayed, if they'd fought Morrison together and won, then Caleb would have had to believe he deserved happiness, would have had to trust that someone could know all his flaws, all his failures, all the ways he was broken, and choose to love him anyway. Would have had to risk being vulnerable again, knowing that vulnerability had destroyed him once before. It was easier, safer, to push her away first, to tell himself he was being selfless when really he was just being afraid. Catherine had been wrong about many things, but she'd been right about one. Caleb was rigid. He held himself to impossible standards, never forgave himself for mistakes, and built walls so high that even people who wanted to love him couldn't find a way in. He'd spent 6 years proving her right, becoming exactly the cold, closed-off man she'd accused him of being. And then Elena had walked into his life. Elena who'd seen past his walls to the lonely, scared man beneath them, who'd challenged him to be brave, to feel, to trust, who'd loved him not despite his brokenness, but because she understood it, carried her own scars, and knew that broken things could still be beautiful. He'd had everything he'd secretly dreamed of for years, and he'd thrown it away because accepting it required more courage than he thought he possessed. The realization brought Caleb to his knees, literally, sinking down onto the floor with his back against the fireplace. He'd been a coward. His mother was right. Elena had been right. He'd chosen fear over love, protection over risk, emptiness over the terrifying possibility of joy. And now she was gone, believing he didn't love her enough to fight for her, believing she wasn't worth the risk, believing that she'd been just another person he'd eventually push away because letting anyone get close was too dangerous. He'd done exactly what Catherine had done, made Elena feel like she wasn't enough, wasn't worth the effort, wasn't worth fighting for. The thought made him physically ill. Caleb had no idea how long he sat there on the floor of his study, wrestling with truths he'd been avoiding for years. But eventually, the desperate need to fix what he'd broken pulled him to his feet. He moved to his desk, pulling out paper and pen with shaking hands, and began to write. Not a business letter, not careful, measured words designed to maintain distance, just raw, honest truth poured onto paper with the desperation of a man who'd finally understood what he was losing. He wrote about his fear, about Catherine's betrayal and how it had convinced him he was fundamentally unlovable, about building walls to keep pain out but realizing too late that he'd also locked himself in, about meeting Elena and how she'd somehow slipped past every defense without even trying, about falling in love despite his terror, about those 3 perfect days when he'd let himself believe happiness was possible, about the morning Morrison's threat had given him an excuse to return to the safety of isolation. He wrote about understanding now that he hadn't been protecting her, he'd been protecting himself from the possibility of being hurt again, about recognizing that pushing away the woman he loved to avoid pain had caused more pain than taking the risk ever could have. And he wrote about being sorry, desperately, completely sorry for making her feel like she wasn't enough, when the truth was she was everything and he'd been too broken to see it. Dawn was breaking by the time Caleb finished. His hand ached from writing, his eyes burned from exhaustion and unshed tears, but the letter was complete, messy, emotional, nothing like the careful correspondence he usually crafted, but absolutely honest. He sealed it, addressed it to Elena in Denver, and then sat staring at it for a long moment. A letter wasn't enough. Words on paper couldn't undo the damage he'd done. But it was a start. No, a letter was a coward's solution. If he was finally going to be brave, if he was going to fight for the woman he loved, he needed to do it in person, needed to look her in the eyes and tell her he'd been wrong, needed to give her the choice he'd taken away, to walk away from him or give him another chance, knowing exactly what kind of broken, scared man she'd be choosing. Caleb stood, decision crystallizing into action. He'd ride to Denver, find Elena, tell her everything in his heart that fear had kept locked away. And if she told him it was too late, that he'd hurt her too badly, that she couldn't trust him not to run again, then he'd accept that consequence. But he wouldn't accept it without fighting first. He was still clutching the letter, preparing to head upstairs to pack, when his study door burst open. James stood there, breathing hard like he'd run from somewhere, his expression urgent. "Caleb, you need to come to town. Now." "I'm actually about to leave for Denver." "No, you need to come to town," James interrupted. "Morrison's having papers served on the ranch, on Mother, on every business you deal with. He's not done destroying you, he's going after everything, everyone connected to you." Cold dread flooded Caleb's veins. "What kind of papers?" "Liens, injunctions, business interference claims. He's using every legal trick to cripple the ranch, and he's doing it now while you're too heartbroken to fight back. James gripped his shoulder. You need to get into town, talk to our lawyer, figure out how to counter this. If you don't act fast, Morrison will own half the ranch by the end of the week. The timing was deliberate, Caleb realized. Morrison had waited until Elena was gone, until Caleb had signed the agreement, until he was at his weakest, then struck with devastating precision. Damn him, Caleb said quietly. So you'll come? Caleb looked down at the letter in his hand, then back at his brother. Going to town meant delaying his trip to Denver, meant letting Elena wait longer, wondering if he'd ever come for her. But if he didn't handle Morrison's latest attack, there would be no ranch to come back to, no future to offer Elena, even if she gave him another chance. I'll come, he said. But James, as soon as we've handled this, I'm riding to Denver, even if it takes days, even if I have to fight Morrison from horseback all the way there. James smiled. About time you started fighting for something other than just survival. They rode to town together, reaching the territorial courthouse by mid-morning. Their lawyer, a sharp older man named Harrison, was already there with documents spread across a table, his expression grim. Morrison's thorough, I'll give him that, Harrison said by way of greeting. He's claiming you violated the terms of your agreement by using ranch resources for personal purposes during your fraudulent marriage. Says you owe him compensation for every meal Elena ate, every piece of clothing she wore, every moment of staff time spent serving her. It's creative, petty, and might actually hold up in court. How much? Caleb asked. By his calculations? About $40,000. The number was staggering, not enough to bankrupt Caleb entirely, but enough to cripple operations for years, enough to force him to sell land, dismiss workers, scale back everything his father had built. He can't be serious, James said. He's entirely serious, and unless you can prove the marriage was legitimate, that Elena was actually your wife and not part of a fraud scheme, he'll win. Harrison looked at Caleb with sympathy. You signed an agreement admitting the marriage was fraudulent. That admission gives Morrison everything he needs. Caleb sank into a chair, the weight of his mistakes pressing down like physical force. By trying to protect Elena, he'd given Morrison the weapon to destroy everything else he cared about. The ranch, his workers, and their families, his mother's security. All of it balanced on the edge of ruin, because Caleb had been too afraid to fight when fighting mattered most. There has to be a way around this, he said. There is, a voice said from the doorway. But you're not going to like it. Caleb's head snapped up. Elena stood in the courthouse doorway, dressed in the same worn blue dress she'd left in, her hair windblown from travel, her expression determined. What are you doing here, Chet? He asked, standing so fast his chair scraped across the floor. Saving you from yourself, Elena said, moving into the room with the confidence of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. Again. Elena, you can't be here. Morrison will what? Try to destroy me? He already did that. She moved to the table, examining Harrison's papers with quick efficiency. Let me guess. He's using Caleb's admission of fraud to claim damages from the ranch? Yes, Harrison confirmed, looking between them with interest. But if you're here, if you're willing to testify that the marriage was legitimate, that might give us grounds to challenge. I'll do better than testify, Elena interrupted. She reached into her own worn bag and pulled out a document. I brought our original contract, the one no one knows exists except me and Caleb, the one that proves we entered into a business arrangement that we both honored in good faith and that later became a genuine marriage. Caleb stared at her. You kept it? Of course I kept it. I kept everything, your letters, the documentation of the money transfers, even receipts from purchases made for our arrangement. Elena met his eyes, and he saw steel beneath the softness. I'm a seamstress, Caleb. I've spent my whole life making things fit, fixing tears, reinforcing weak seams. Did you really think I wouldn't document a contract worth thousands of dollars? But showing that contract proves Morrison's case, Harrison pointed out. It proves the marriage started as fraud. It proves the marriage started as a business arrangement, Elena corrected, which is perfectly legal. Marriages of convenience happen all the time, for citizenship, for financial benefit, for social advancement. The law doesn't require love, just legal consent and paperwork. She turned to Caleb. We had both. We entered into an arrangement legally, we followed through on our commitments, and then, completely separate from the business aspects, we fell in love. That's not fraud. That's life. Harrison was nodding slowly. She's right. If we can prove the original arrangement was entered into with good faith on both sides, that no deception was intended toward the court or legal entities, then Morrison's fraud claim falls apart. The marriage might have started unconventionally, but it was always legal. But the backdated license, Caleb started, was a mistake born of panic, not malicious fraud, Elena finished. We were trying to make paperwork match reality after the fact. Foolish, technically illegal, but not fraud with intent to harm, especially since we immediately entered into a genuine marital relationship afterward. She looked at Harrison. Can you work with that? I can absolutely work with that, Harrison said, excitement building in his voice. If Mrs. Hartwell is willing to testify, I'm willing, Elena said firmly. I'm willing to testify, to show the contract, to explain our arrangement to anyone who will listen. I'm willing to stand in court and tell the world that I married Caleb Hartwell initially for business reasons and stayed married to him for love. She turned to Caleb and her voice softened. I'm willing to fight, Caleb. The question is whether you are. Caleb couldn't speak past the emotion clogging his throat. Elena was here, standing in front of him, risking her reputation, her safety, everything she'd gained by leaving, because she was willing to fight for them even when he'd been too afraid to fight for himself. Why? He finally managed. After everything I said, everything I did, why would you come back? Because someone very wise once told me that broken things can still be beautiful, Elena said. And because I love you, even when you're being an idiot, especially when you're being an idiot, actually, because that's when you need someone to love you most. She moved closer, closing the distance between them. I left to show you what losing me would feel like, to force you to understand what you were choosing. Did it work? It worked, Caleb said roughly. He reached for her hands, holding them like lifelines. Elena, I was coming for you. This morning, before James arrived, I was packing to ride to Denver, to tell you I was sorry, that I'd been wrong, that I was too afraid to fight for us, but I'm not anymore. He pulled the letter from his pocket, now creased and worn. I wrote you this. Spent all night trying to find words to explain why I'd been such a coward, why I pushed away the best thing that ever happened to me. Elena took the letter, her eyes scanning the first few lines, and tears started streaming down her face. You really were coming for me? I really was. I finally understood what you'd been trying to tell me, that loving you didn't require me to be perfect or fearless. It just required me to show up, to choose you every day, even when I'm scared, especially when I'm scared. He touched her face, wiping away tears with his thumb. I'm still scared, Elena. Terrified, actually. But I'm more terrified of living without you than I am of risking my heart again. Good, Elena said, laughing through tears. Because I'm terrified too. But we can be terrified together. James cleared his throat loudly. This is very touching, really, but we have a legal strategy to plan and Morrison to destroy. Can you two save the reunion for later? Elena laughed, the sound bright and real. He's right. We have work to do. They spent the next 3 hours planning their counterattack with Harrison's guidance. Elena's contract provided the foundation, proof that their arrangement had been entered into honestly, with clear terms and mutual benefit. Combined with testimony from Mrs. Hartwell about the genuine affection that had developed, statements from ranch workers who'd witnessed their relationship evolve, and the fact that Caleb had honored every term of the original agreement, they had a strong case that their marriage was legitimate in every way that mattered legally. Morrison based his entire strategy on you being too heartbroken to fight, Harrison explained. He assumed Caleb would stay defeated and Elena would stay gone. Having you both here, united and willing to expose the full truth, undermines everything he's built. When can we file? Caleb asked. I can have the response ready by tomorrow morning. We'll file a counterclaim. Abuse of legal process, harassment, tortious interference with business relationships. Make Morrison defend himself for a change instead of always being on the attack. Harrison grinned. This is going to be satisfying. They left the courthouse as afternoon shadows lengthened across the town square. Caleb kept his hand in Elena's, afraid that if he let go, she might disappear again. They walked in silence toward where James had the horses tied, the weight of everything still unsaid pressing between them. Finally, Caleb stopped, pulling Elena around to face him. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, your willingness to fight for me, your love. But I'm asking for all of it anyway because I'm finally selfish enough to want my own happiness more than I want to protect myself from pain." "You're not selfish," Elena said. "You're human, flawed and scared and doing your best, just like everyone else." "I hurt you." "You did," she agreed. "And if you do it again, if you run away the next time things get hard, I won't come back. I love you, Caleb, but I won't spend my life chasing a man who won't stand still long enough to be loved." Her expression was serious now, all the levity gone. "If we do this, if we make this marriage real in every way, you have to promise me you'll stay. Not because things are easy, but because we're worth the hard work." "I promise," Caleb said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I promise to stay, to fight, to choose us even when I'm scared. I promise to trust you when you say you love me, even when the voice in my head tells me I don't deserve it. I promise to be brave enough to be vulnerable, because that's what real love requires." Elena smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Hartwell." "No more deals," Caleb said, pulling her close. "No more contracts or arrangements or negotiations. Just love. Messy, complicated, terrifying, beautiful love." He kissed her there in the middle of town, not caring who saw, not caring about reputation or propriety, or anything except the woman in his arms who'd fought for him when he'd been too afraid to fight for himself. When they finally broke apart, James was grinning. "About damn time," he said. "Now, can we go home? Mother's going to be insufferable when she finds out she was right about everything." The ride back to the ranch felt different than any journey Caleb had taken before. Elena rode with him, settled against his chest, and they talked about everything: the fear they'd both carried, the mistakes they'd made, the future they wanted to build together. No more walls, no more careful distance, just honesty, raw and real and redemptive. Mrs. Hartwell met them at the door, took one look at their joined hands and Elena's tear-stained, smiling face, and said simply, "Thank heavens. I was about to ride to Denver myself and drag you both back here to sort out your nonsense." "Your faith in us is touching, Mother," Caleb said dryly. "My faith is in Elena, who has more sense in her little finger than you do in your whole stubborn head." But she pulled Caleb into a fierce hug anyway. "I'm proud of you, son, for finally being brave enough to fight for your own happiness." The trial came 3 weeks later. Morrison had fought their counterfiling with every resource at his disposal, but Elena's testimony was devastating to his case. She sat in the witness box, poised and articulate, and explained their arrangement with perfect clarity. Two people entering into a business agreement that provided mutual benefit, who then fell genuinely in love. She showed the contract, explained each term, demonstrated how both parties had honored their commitments in good faith. "Mr. Morrison wants you to believe we committed fraud," Elena said to the judge. "But the only fraud here is his claim that love has to look a certain way to be real. My husband and I found each other in unusual circumstances. We built our relationship on honesty and mutual respect, and we fell in love despite our best efforts to keep things purely professional. That's not fraud. That's the most honest thing either of us has ever done." The judge ruled in their favor. Not only dismissed Morrison's claims, but ordered him to pay damages for abuse of process and issued an injunction preventing him from further harassment. It was a complete victory, crushing and public and absolutely satisfying. Morrison left the courthouse looking 20 years older, his political allies suddenly scarce, his reputation for invincibility shattered. Caleb felt no triumph, only relief. The fight was over. They'd won. And more importantly, they'd won together. "What do we do now?" Elena asked as they left the courthouse, Caleb's arm around her waist, Mrs. Hartwell and James trailing behind. "Now?" Caleb stopped, turning to face her fully. "Now we get married. Really married. Not a secret ceremony, not a business arrangement. A real wedding with our family and friends, where I can stand up in front of everyone who matters and promise to love you for the rest of my life." We're already married, Elena pointed out, but she was smiling. We have a legal document. I want to give you a celebration. Want everyone to know that you chose me, and I'm spending every day for the rest of my life proving I deserve that choice. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Marry me again, Elena. This time with joy instead of fear. This time knowing exactly what we're promising each other. Yes, Elena said, laughing and crying at once. Yes, I'll marry you again. As many times as you want, in as many ways as you need, until you finally believe that I'm not going anywhere. I believe it now, Caleb said. You fought Morrison, fought me, fought for us when I was too scared to fight for myself. If that's not proof of forever, I don't know what is. They married again 6 weeks later in the small white chapel where they'd attended that first awkward church social. Half the territory came, curious to see the couple whose unconventional love story had defeated the powerful Senator Morrison. Elena wore a dress she'd made herself, ivory silk with tiny pearl buttons, simple and elegant and perfect. Caleb wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. When the minister asked if he took Elena to be his wife, Caleb said, I do, with my whole heart, for as long as we both live. When asked if she took Caleb to be her husband, Elena said, I do, with eyes wide open to all his flaws, because I love him anyway. The congregation laughed. Mrs. Hartwell cried. James served as best man and made a speech about stubborn brothers and the women brave enough to love them. They danced in the church hall afterward, that same waltz they'd practiced so many times in the library, but now every step was pure joy instead of careful performance. Happy? Caleb murmured as they swayed together. Terrified, Elena admitted. But yes, happy. You? Same. Terrified and happy, and so in love with you, I can barely breathe. He kissed her temple. Thank you for not giving up on me, for coming back when I was too stubborn to come for you. Thank you for finally believing you were worth fighting for, Elena replied. They built their life together after that, not perfectly, but honestly. Caleb still had days when fear crept in, when he caught himself building walls out of old habit. But Elena would call him on it, gently but firmly, and he'd work to tear them down again. Elena still had moments of doubt, wondering if she really belonged in this life, if she was enough. But Caleb would hold her and remind her of all the ways she'd changed him, saved him, made him believe in second chances. They turned the ranch into something new, still cattle and land management, but also a seamstress shop in town where Elena trained other women in her craft. She hired girls like she'd been, desperate and talented and needing a chance, and gave them the opportunity she'd once needed. 3 years after that first wedding, Elena sat in the library where they'd once practiced dancing and told Caleb she was pregnant. He cried, actual tears streaming down his face, and thanked her for giving him everything he'd thought he'd never deserve. Their daughter was born in spring, tiny and perfect, and with her father's dark eyes. They named her Adelaide Catherine, honoring the woman who'd believed in them both and reclaiming a name that had once meant pain. Caleb held his daughter and understood for the first time what his mother had tried to tell him years ago. That love isn't about being perfect or fearless. It's about showing up every day and choosing to be vulnerable anyway. She's perfect, he whispered. She's going to be just as stubborn as you, Elena said, exhausted but glowing. Heaven help us, Caleb said, but he was smiling. 5 years became 10. Adelaide gained siblings, 2 more daughters, and finally a son who looked just like his Uncle James. The ranch prospered, Morrison faded from politics in disgrace, and the story of how Caleb and Elena Hartwell fell in love became the kind of legend told at other weddings, proof that sometimes the best love stories start with terrible plans and end with terrible courage. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb took Elena back to that spot on the veranda where he'd kissed her in the rain, where she'd told him she loved him, and he'd been too afraid to believe it. Do you remember this place? He asked. How could I forget? This is where you finally stopped being an idiot. Elena smiled, leaning into his embrace. I was a spectacular idiot, Caleb agreed. But you loved me anyway. I loved you because you were worth it. You just needed to believe that yourself. Caleb pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed now, creased from years of handling, their original contract, the one Elena had used to save them from Morrison's schemes. I kept this, he said, After everything, I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. It felt important somehow. Elena took it, reading through the terms they'd agreed to so long ago. $5,000. A shop in Denver. No romantic feelings. Just business. She laughed, the sound rich with memory and affection. We broke every term of this contract, she said. We honored the ones that mattered, Caleb corrected. I did clear your debts. I did give you a shop, just closer than Denver. And you got your freedom at the end of the year, freedom to choose to stay rather than being obligated to. And the most important term? Elena traced the line about no romantic feelings. The most important term was always a lie, Caleb said. I think I was already falling in love with you when we wrote it. The rule wasn't to prevent feelings. It was to protect me from admitting I had them. Elena handed back the contract. What should we do with it? Caleb looked at the paper that had started everything. The bargain that had become real love, the lie that had transformed into their truest truth. Then he walked to the edge of the veranda and tore it into pieces, letting the wind carry them across the ranch lands. We don't need it anymore, he said. We never really did. The contract was just an excuse for two scared people to let themselves be vulnerable with each other. Best excuse I ever made, Elena said. Best bargain I ever struck. Caleb pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. Though it wasn't the contract that saved us. It was you, refusing to let me hide behind rules and fear. Choosing to fight for us when I was too afraid to fight for myself. Coming back when I didn't deserve it. You did deserve it, Elena said firmly. You've always deserved to be loved, Caleb. You just needed someone stubborn enough to keep proving it until you believed. I believe it now, he said. Took me a while, but I finally believe that I'm worth loving, that we're worth fighting for, that happiness isn't something I have to earn. It's something I'm allowed to accept when someone offers it freely. They stood together as the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside the house, their children were laughing. Mrs. Hartwell was probably orchestrating something, and life was messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. I love you, Caleb said, the words easy now after years of practice. I love you too, Elena replied, even when you're being stubborn. Especially when I'm being stubborn, Caleb corrected, and kissed her as the last light faded from the sky. The bargain had been struck a decade ago in desperation and fear, but what grew from that unlikely beginning was something neither of them could have predicted. A love built on honesty, strengthened by choice, sustained by the daily decision to be brave enough to be vulnerable. It wasn't the perfect love story. It was better than perfect. It was real. And in the end, that was all either of them had ever really wanted, someone to be real with, someone who saw all the broken pieces and chose to stay anyway, someone who understood that love wasn't about avoiding pain, but about having someone to face it with. Caleb Hartwell had spent years believing he was unlovable, that vulnerability was weakness, that protecting himself from hurt was the same as protecting himself from life. Elena Cross had spent years believing she had to earn her place in the world, that her value came from what she could provide, that love was something other people got to have while she just survived. Together, they'd learned that love wasn't a business transaction or a performance or something you had to be perfect enough to deserve. Love was a choice, made every day, through fear and joy and everything in between. A choice to show up, to be honest, to trust that being seen completely was worth the risk of being hurt. They'd made that choice once in a moment of desperation, promising to pretend for a year. They'd made it again every day since, choosing to love truly instead of carefully, and they'd keep making it for all the years to come. Not because a contract required it, but because they'd finally learned that the best things in life come without conditions, without rules, without the safety net of knowing exactly how things will turn out. The best things come from being brave enough to love without guarantees, from taking the bargain that seems impossible and making it real, from understanding that sometimes the lie you tell the world becomes the truest thing you've ever known. That was their story. Messy, complicated, beautiful, and absolutely, completely true. And it was only just beginning.